Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another exciting episode of the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live on American Freedom Radio for the listening pleasure of the Five Eyes Network, for which myself and my guest perhaps are on the top 100 to listen to shows in New Zealand. Now, so my very special guest joining me live from Christchurch is Ben Vidgen from VMAN Productions. Ben, we haven't been able to catch up for like a month since we were down in Christchurch together. What have you discovered, bro? I've seriously just want to give you the floor for like as long as you need. Go for your life.
Well, it's going to be we'll try and keep this condensed because basically so we haven't caught up for about a month. I've actually been based here in Christchurch for around about the last month, with the exception of about 10 days out of the city. And what I've basically been doing is going around following out the various leads and informations and stories that were put out on day one, and effectively seeing what I can do to authenticate them or dispel them as I can. It's going to be one of the things I can say that when the story broke about the event on March 15th, which is the attack on the two mosques by the gunman Brent and Tarrant, there were lots and lots of things basically stated at the time, and there was lots and lots of information. And unfortunately, our corporate media hasn't done a really good job of actually going back and sort of saying, well, this is what occurred here, or this is why this occurred, and subsequently, it's created a very a messy environment that if you're sitting on a computer screen looking at things, it's very easy to turn around and think, well, what the hell is actually going on? So, pretty much, what we turn around to, let's go back a little bit of a situation, or the very almost before the beginning. Let's go back all the way to 2015. In 2015, there was an attempted live streaming of a shooting in Orlando, USA, and that was posted onto the 4chan network, which is one of the networks that Brent and Tarrant has been established as being, a fairly regular viewer to. And it's been quite interesting because one of the narrators of this whole news story in the corporate area has been very, very schizophrenic. On one level, they've been running around telling us that Brent and Tarrant is a single gunman, or sort of slightly kind of implying that that's where the information led them to the conclusions. And then at the same time, they've been putting out stories that sort of keep that whole multiple gunman situation going, and then also sort of suggesting that he's part of this wider right-wing network. Well, and one of the things they sort of said was, well, when the event occurred, was that they didn't know that there was any indication that this guy was out there, or that he was a potential threat, or that New Zealand was going to be a target. So again, let's go back to this Orlando 215 event, because after the attempted live streaming, there was a message put on 4chan basically saying, "Dunedin, you're next." This is, I think, quite significant because at that particular time, the authorities responded to that statement made on 4chan by putting the University of Dunedin into lockdown. So for me, what that establishes was that, if nothing else, the 4chan networks were being monitored. So for them to say that they didn't know that this was a threat or that there was potential, that seems to be a little bit disingenuous against what we can actually establish in the events. We then also know that sort of in the last sort of previous 2 years, up until the events on March 15, Brent and Tarrant sort of came down to New Zealand, got himself integrated into Dunedin, was part of the Dunedin gun culture. And there's another significant event that comes along at this point, because in late 2017, early 2018, the Dunedin Pistol Club president had a burglary at his home, and the consequences of that, well, what he actually did was he rang up a couple of ladies of the night, and they came around his place, and he showed off all his weapons and all his toys, and they went back to their mates who were actually members of the Bandito motorcycle gang, who then decided that they were going to actually knock over this particular president, and they took out the book that he had, which had all the members, but they took from his place over 20,000 rounds of ammunition. So again, that's another red flag. You would have thought at a time when 20,000 rounds, which is enough to start a small war or carry out a very large shooting spree, went missing, that that would have been of concern, that they would have looked at everybody within that particular environment. We know from, again, news press articles out there that there were, and I'm not going to blame everybody who picks up a rifle and goes hunting or is even part of these particular pistol and rifle clubs, but there was clear signs that there was a toxic culture. So that's the second sort of sign that they actually missed. Regardless of missing the signs, Brenton Tarrant then turned around and carried out this horrendous attack, and that's where things get very, very difficult, because, again, as events have unfolded, people have been seeing events, they've been seeing them from what information is available to them, and there really hasn't been a really lot of attempt to kind of explain or walk people through the forensics. So what I've attempted to do down here is go around and actually look at all these different components, because, again, let's break it down. When I first saw the video, which runs to 25 minutes and 40 seconds thereabouts, with him actually turning around and carrying out the shooting from the shooting phase to him being detained on Betty Avenue, you're looking at 17 minutes. When I first looked at it, I've been around. I was in the territorial, which is like the Army Reserves, for 6 years. I was what they call an artillery intelligence, so ballistics was part of my training. So I was looking at this and going, well, hey, this is not right. Like, where's the damage on the walls, and how come it's not making the sounds I expect? And it really threw me. And I initially remember saying at the time, you got it, mate. I'm just on a radio show at the moment. Sorry, someone just walking past. So I remember saying at the particular time, thinking, well, what the hell is this? Is this, CGI fake? Well, it just didn't seem that particularly real. That's our very first issue. Our very, very first problem here is that we haven't really stopped to actually look at what kind of equipment that Brenton Tarrant actually used. And my understanding was he used a GoPro 400, and what he actually did was he had it set on the lowest settings, and he was doing it so that he could actually make his live stream at the same time, while attempting to actually save the data onto an SD card. Now, if you go online and you actually look at the reviews, I tell you that once you do that, it has real problems with. Basically, what it does is, if you let's take, for example, one of the issues is that when you look at the video, he would fire rounds and the bullets would seemingly go out into the middle of the air and then they'd disappear, which is one of the reasons why people thought that this was a CGI. Well, in actual fact, what's actually happening is that once the bullets got out of focusing range, the GoPro is designed to basically kind of almost morph it into the background. So that's why it looks like it's disappearing. It's not actually disappearing. It's just the autocorrect situation. And again, as you walk through this process, there are things like, oh, look, there's a guy and he's changing. One moment he's got shoes on, and the next moment he hasn't. Well, no, it's just the resolution and the angles were actually providing these what, for want of a better word, illusions, but that's not really what's going on. It's just a low resolution. Same situation when you walk in and you turn left in the mosque. Some of the shooters turn around and they got themselves caught up by one of the exit doors. When you look at the high-resolution photos, there's a switch on the side which has been put in recently, and it's very, very, very clear in the photos taken after the event, but at the time it doesn't look like it's there. Well, that's because the shading and so on the way it's done. Again, this GoPro basically just fades it into the background. Now, I know for a lot of people out there, are you there, Vinny?
Yep. Yeah, hello? Absolutely, bro. I'm here.
Okay. I know for a lot of people out there, they're going to be going, oh, no, this is all, he's a shill and all the usual bits and pieces. But
well, one can only hope.
I would like... Well, we hope. I mean, the whole point of everything is people give you information out there, and the trick is that you get that information, and then you go away and you cross-reference it, or you apply these different methodologies to verify whether or not that person's actually telling you something correct or not. Now, one of the things, and I think Max Egan's done it, and again, people go, but the point of the matter is, if you turn around and you put that video footage out there through resolution filters, you start to see that the imagery starts to become a lot more clearer. And again, a lot of these things which we thought were going on just simply aren't there. And the question is, you go online, you start to Google, you'll find this issue comes up. There people have provided, software that's online so that you can actually do this yourself. Now, the question is very, very simple for your readers. They can either choose to go, no, and hold on to their belief system, or they can actually go and take this step I've just suggested, go and test it out themselves and work out whether or not, once they turn around and start to look at the video again, whether or not they get a completely different imagery. Now, that's up to the readers. I have no control over it, but this is what basically I did. Was I looked at the footage of the material technology he was utilising, looked at all these different seemingly anomalies, and then once I actually understood the technology, I went, okay, that's not actually the issue. So again, when he turns around, he gets in there, he jumps in the vehicle. Again, let's walk through this slowly. So he's arrived at the mosque. He's using this GoPro situation. He's walking, and I don't have all the answers, by the way. He walks down the road. And as he walks into the mosque, and bear in mind that at the moment he's dressed in full, battle fatigue. He's got a helmet on his head. He's got a shotgun over his shoulder. He's got a gun in his hand. As he walks up the mosque, there is a couple right by the gate. He doesn't appear to show them any interest, and they don't appear to actually seem that concerned. Now, there may be all sorts of rational explanations. I don't know. These are one of the things which I still do not have an explanation for. I do have lots of explanations for things that have been put out that I can turn around and say, no, there isn't. For example, as he walks through the door, we turn around, as he walks through the door, you'll see a silver Toyota. We'll come back to that silver Toyota in a second. But as he walks through the door, the first thing he does is he uses a shotgun. He's run out of ammunition at that particular point. He discards it. And then people turn around later and say, oh, yeah, the shotgun appeared from no one. No, go back and actually look. Because, again, the issue that a lot of people had was they weren't actually, and this is, partly the state made it very difficult for us to actually go on there and have a proper look. So we were either having to do from frames or from little clips that were put out there. But the reality is, if you actually walk through it, what he does is he uses the first weapon, he then discards it, he then goes onto a second weapon, and he walks in there, and we know the rest of the situation. So then again, the question becomes, CGI, these are all fake actors. Well, one of the things, and you were here on the day that, the ferry went on probably about this, about a week later after we arrived, we went round and we spoke to people like Max Elliott, who was at the Linwood Mosque. He's a real person. He really was there. Christchurch is only a city of less than 100,000. It's not that big. You don't have to go far to find people that know people that went to the mosque in Al Noor or the mosque in Linwood. We spoke to some of the people at both of the mosques. They are definitely real people. So, again, this whole thing of crisis actors, come on, guys, this is just a bit silly, because if you go online, you can actually find lots and lots of videos out there of survivors talking. Now, the question is, you can all turn around and say, oh, no, that's all fake, that's fabricated. Or you can pay attention and find out, some of these people work at businesses or they have particular jobs. Again, use your internet to go and find out, do those businesses really exist? Do those places really work? If need be, if you really feel that passionate about it, go out and actually ring the people, because this is pretty much what Vinny, I've been doing here for the last month, is actually, and as far as I'm aware of it, I'm the only person in the alternative media that has been conducting their investigation from being here on the ground. Reality is, those people really do actually exist. So let's go back to this mosque. So, okay, one of the things I've just turned around today, and it was, up until about 3 hours ago, the one thing that was really, in fact, there's still things that really bugged me. Now, one of the things that bugged me was that it's out there on the newspapers for the people that still got the videos. We've got the situation that the live stream video ends at 1:57 or 17 minutes from when he's first shooting, and we then have a police line saying that, well, he's at the Linwood Mosque at 1:55. Now, to describe this to your listeners, basically what Brenton Tarrant did was he moved in a three sides of a square. You go from Al Noor down Bailey Avenue, that's one side of the square. You go from there down the Linwood Avenue area, that's another side, and then you go on to Brian, which is the third remaining one, which was where he stopped. So when they turn around and tell us that the live video footage is, it stops at 1:57, and then the police are telling us, oh no, he was at the mosque, the second mosque, at 1:55, you're like, well, how can that possibly be? Basic mathematics tells you that this is impossible. And when I the police put out their latest timeline, I looked at it and went, no way, and I took 3 steps. Last night I turned around and I spoke to one of my friends in Germany who has the video. We're not allowed to use it in New Zealand, so what I've been doing is basically having a pair of eyes outside of New Zealand jurisdiction to actually turn around whenever I want to know something. He goes and looks for me, gives me back the feedback. So I did that. I looked at my original notes, which was when I did actually have the video before they'd actually declared it actually outlawed. And then I turned around and I cross-referenced against all the mainstream, and they all said very clearly, 157, the video stops. So when the police put up this 155, I'm going like, how in the hell can that be? Well, about 3 hours ago, I walked in to Your Shout, which is a little place that you can make your own beers and whatnot. And I actually went in there because I was selling advertising for my newspaper, and we got onto the subject. And lo and behold, Your Shout, which is 225 Linwood Avenue, Christchurch. Again, you can look it up online. This is actually located right next to the Linwood Mosque. Jared Ford Manson is the owner of Your Shout, and his CTV camera looks directly onto the mosque. In other words, he was able to see Brenton Tarrant's Subaru pull up. He was able to see Brenton Tarrant get into the vehicle, and the timing stamp of that was at 1:55. So it actually matches up with exactly what the police say. I mean, I know, we're often meant to be the conspiracy show, but in this particular case, I've really been looking at this and hard and fast, and, that's where we have the situation, which is the issue is the reason why we've got the 157 timeline and differentiate is the issue is the clock on Brenton Tarrant's GoPro. That's what's out. Everything else is correct. The CTV footage, which I was speaking to at Your Shout, that's fine. We've turned around and actually addressed it that day. I also turned around and cross-referenced it against, there's a couple of hotels that were in our Nor video. They again seem to corroborate that the cross-reference it against the Your Shout. So, there we have it. Now, we do have a couple of other discrepancies, and we'll go back to the original mosque, the Al Noor Mosque. When you walk through the gates, you walk up to the gates, probably about a distance of about 20 feet, and you walk down the hallway. But just before you actually walk through the door, which is where people, take their shoes off. So again, this whole thing of, oh, look, the person in the mosque has got shoes, and now they don't. Well, you don't actually wear shoes in the mosque anyway. But we have, right outside the front door, we have a silver Toyota. The number plate I've done is I've checked is one is the possibility of, and again, if people say, oh no, that's not the number, just bear with me guys, it's live radio, I don't have my notes in front of me. I believe it's FOH 385 or FQEH 385. Again, I'll post it up. I've got a still footage of it. Max Egan's got one actually on it. So the point I'm making is, in that video clip, you can clearly see a number plate. So we have this issue of this vehicle outside. When Brenton Tarrant comes back out, he points the vehicle, the rifle, directly at the windscreen of this vehicle. He goes back to his vehicle to get second round of ammunition. He comes back in. As he comes in, that vehicle is actually pulling out and it's going towards Brenton Tarrant. He doesn't actually shoot at the vehicle, and that seems, on the surface, extremely unusual. I've managed through Carjammer to confirm that, yes, it's definitely a silver Toyota, and I'll come back again to this point.
We have we have a comment in the chat room from the Crow House. Max Egan's actually in the chat with us. FQH875 was the number plate. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Max. So, we have the situation where for Carjammer that's been confirmed. It is a silver Toyota, which is, again, quite interesting because, as I said to you, there's been this very schizophrenic relationship been running with the corporate media. The only time that the corporate media has ever addressed the issue of that vehicle head on, in fact, they haven't. There's been a lot of discussion about it. Someone came online and suggested that vehicle belonged to a, and again, if your listeners are out there, please, feel free to jump in and give you the name, but it belonged to basically a guy called Kevin Arps, who is a white supremacist. He has a vehicle which, on the surface, appears to have the same black sun or neo-Nazi symbol as appears on Brenton Tarrant's backpack. He is clearly a white supremacist. He's been in the trouble with the police before, including dropping off a box of pigskins at that particular mosque. So, the media obviously were following what we've been discussing because they turned around and ran the story about this vehicle and how it's got the same sun. And so they're really clearly following a narrative. And one of the narrators suggested that number plate belonged to that particular company. So the media have been really trying to lead us towards this neo-Nazi connection. The problem is, if you use Carjammer, which is a service in New Zealand, we can establish one thing clearly, which is, no, it's not that guy's company's vehicles. And actually, we know it's the silver Toyota. That's what we can confirm. I'm still working on this particular issue. I'm hoping that we might be able to turn around and actually establish who this vehicle belongs. So I've got a couple of things in the pipeline which I'm still working on. And I'll just break this down. Really what we have also have is an issue in New Zealand that a couple of years ago you could have gone to the post office, simply run the plates through, and they'll give you this particular information. Now you can only get it through. Again, I'm not going to sort of overplay my cards, but there's limited areas where you can get it, and you do run into issues of the Privacy Act. I think I can get around this. However, we also have an issue in the sense of, really, I mean, what I would like to do at this stage is almost go to the Mosque, because again, let's go back and have a look at where this vehicle's actually parked. The Toyota's parked directly outside the front doors. Somebody in that mosque must know about that vehicle. Somebody in that mosque may even know whose vehicle it was, because that's a very prime car park. And you don't, you imagine it's Friday or prayers, it's going to be, it's going to be there from day one, because otherwise it would have been filled out. So in some ways, the obvious thing to do would be to go to the mosque and saying whose car this is, and if somebody in the mosque does know that vehicle, or even if someone actually owns that vehicle, please come forward and step out, because this is one of the issues of anomalies that still need to be addressed. I don't at this stage actually have an answer for it, but I am, trying to be down here on the ground and trying to unfold this. If we find that car plate doesn't actually trace back to anybody in the mosque, we're going to have some very, very interesting issues. And again, there have been several cases in New Zealand as well where we've discovered vehicles which have been used, and I'm clarifying this, I'm not blaming any organisation, I'm just providing an example, but we've had cases where vehicles have been used by the SIS, people have turned around, run the plates, and discover that they belong to a vehicle that's on the other end of the country. So if we run into a scenario like that, that's probably going to be, that vehicle today, it's probably going to be our best chance of working out, was there more than just Brenton Tarrant actually involved? Because let's again, moving forward from there, we've had issues of situations like saying, there are multiple shooters and some bits and pieces, and we'll get into that, for example. But then again, let's go back about a week ago, just before I left, actually about 10 days ago, just before I left Christchurch to take a little bit of a break, I ran a little YouTube clip, and I pointed out that one of the things I had noticed in my field investigation was that the day one count, if you like, of people that were put in handcuffs, which everyone agreed that was the case, gives us a count of 5 people, and that's the young 18-year-old that was arrested for supposedly downloading material, relates to events supposedly before the mosque shooting, which include taking the photographs of the Al-Noor saying target acquired. That particular person, by the way, is currently out on bail, but he's number one. Obviously, Brenton Tarrant is the second person, so he's shooter number 2. We then turned around and had a person turn up on Harris Street. This location is very, very important too, because it defined the person that the arrest was made on Harris Street with a female. It turns out that this particular person was actually running off to Linwood School to try and do a Bruce Willis and save his kid and do Vigilante Act. So he was charged but released immediately. So that gives us our 1, 2, 3, 4. We had a guy that was arrested in camouflage by Papanui School, which is quite some far away from any of this particular action. He turned out to be the janitor. That's number 5. But I've had a photo which I've been holding up my sleeve up until now. The original photo is actually taken by David Williams. I think he's a photojournalist syndicated to one of the more mainstream media. He has a photo of a gentleman that's in handcuffs, who is arrested on Strickland Street. Now, Strickland Street is just literally around the corner from where Brenton Tarrant was actually arrested, who's arrested on the corner of Bryant and Tarrant. When we put that photo up originally, we didn't know where the location was. All we actually had was a road sign behind him. So what I did was I spent a better part of an afternoon driving around Christchurch, till I found that road sign, and that's which gave me the location that it's actually directly on Strickland and Brougham Street. It's the sign in the background is the Norman Kirk Flats, which is basically a flat named after one of our prime ministers. So this guy in handcuffs now gives us our sixth guy that was put in handcuffs on the day. So we are one person more up upon what was being said on day one, and what until now has been acknowledged that everyone's been saying, oh no, all 5 people are counted. No, we've actually got one guy still out there, because that person isn't the guy on Papanui. He's not Brenton Tarrant. He's not the young one. He's not the guy and the woman on Harris Street. This is quite location, very just around the corner. Now, this, again, may be, once we actually peel it apart and really get down to the bones and don't make conclusions, but just work the facts through, this may have a very, very innocuous reason. I note, for example, that the guy in the handcuffs, he's wearing basically $40 shoes. He's wearing very much a working class outfit. I'm pretty damn certain that he's not an international terrorist. So, if it turns out that he's just Joe Blogg who's been obnoxious and the cops put him in cuffs, yep, I can go with that. But I want to find out who he actually is, because right now we have this one additional person. But the point is, I made this original commentary about, hey, we've got 6 people. I didn't throw out what my details were. I didn't throw out what my cards were. The following day, the Christchurch Press, or in fact, I think it was actually Stuff, ran a story saying, the police considered that there might have been 6, but they didn't provide any elaboration. And then the chairman said, oh, no, the Brenton Tarrant said there was up to 9 people. Number one, the mainstream media actually didn't provide any information. They simply reacted to what we did. Number two, what they actually turned around and did was their source was Brenton Tarrant. And let's go back and have a little look at this as well, because this has been an issue, the schizophrenic situation. Of one level, we're meant to believe that it's one person, but then they sort of insinuate, well, maybe there's other people, and maybe he's part of this right-wing network. And, well, you can't have it either way. So can you please clarify what your stance actually is? We turn around and we've got these situations where they've turned around and they've got a logo on Brenton Tarrant's backpack that ties up to, I think it's called the Agov 330 unit in Ukraine. So that's like, he's part of this, right-wing group. Good luck on that one, guys, because if anyone actually follows that particular unit back to its equation, you find that this is a unit that worked with Islamic terrorists actually during the Balkans. There are photos out there of the people from the 330 working with the US military. So, if that's your right-wing conspiracy, then you've got a bit of a problem, because it leads you right back to Uncle Sam. Now, not saying that's not the case, but I'm just pointing out that, these are some of the problems we have, is that all this information that the press have been relying on ultimately comes from Brenton Tarrant. And I'll give you another example of that one, which is it suggested that Brenton Tarrant actually met Anders Breivik, who's the Norwegian shooter from a few years ago. He said, oh, yes, I met him, and I have approval of him from this, I think it's called the Temple of Night Brotherhood or something. The point is, number one, was that Brenton Tarrant has been actually in incarceration since, not Brenton Tarrant, Anders Breivik has been in incarceration since 2010. He doesn't have access to the internet. He's only allowed to actually speak to females on the phone. So that claim is clearly not correct. We have things like Brenton Tarrant saying, he made his money from, the media saying, he made his money from Bitcoin. Again, the source of this is Brenton Tarrant, and the company which he names
is BitConnect.
They actually...
And they didn't exist at the time.
Well, I mean, again, we want to be, let's just state with the facts. His father died in 2010. Now, his father left an inheritance. The amount of that inheritance, the only source to date for that has been the Australian, the same newspaper article which gives this figure of $500,000, also talks about information about tracing information back to IP, which they insinuate is Brenton Tarrant. So in that story, they make it clear that their information is from the intelligence services, but they don't provide any corroborating information to establish in actual fact whether his father gave him, who was, by the way, very much a working class, low socioeconomic employee. There's been no authentication about the figure of 500,000, which I will briefly address with, because I've done a very, and it's not a hard fast, I wouldn't, use as a court of evidence, but I did a brief calculation with his weapons, his travels, his rental, his food, and I calculated that, in 10 years he would have used up basically around about 500,000. So he just happened to use the exact amount that was being put out. And please provide us, if you're going to turn around and make these statements, then provide us some authentication for the information, because right now the press is actually really not doing a very good job of it, and subsequently people turn around and naturally see a conspiracy, which is not to say that there isn't. I'm just simply saying that when I've turned around and walked through the facts, I find a lot of the stories that are actually put out can be knocked down, or simply just don't stand up when you actually address them. Of this issue of basically Brenton Tarrant belonging to a right-wing organisation. It may come out down the timeline that he actually is, but so far we have had not one single iota of information put forward that shows clearly that he does belong to such an organisation. Now, the closest, people say, oh, what about the money that he donated to these far-right organisations? Yeah, fair enough, but the problem is the traffic only goes one way. We've got nothing from those organisations showing that he actually had a connection to any of them. The closest we've come again has been a very, very recent story where right-wing groups in Australia said that they attempted to recruit him, and they attempted to recruit him, by the way, by visiting 4chan, the group which apparently is known as the most violent place on the internet, which apparently is monitored enough that we can turn around and carry out a lockdown on the Dunedin University, but we can't spot this particular guy that was stood out so clearly to right-wing organisations that they recruited him. But as I said, that's the only attempt, the only indication we have of the traffic going the other way. Now, I'm not trying to justify right-wing or be supportive or sympathetic to neo-Nazi organisations anyway. If anyone goes out there and they'll read, there's an article out there by Nexus Magazine, December 1995, January 1996. It's basically about my connections about the Islamic terrorist organisations' ties to right-wing neo-Nazi organisations. I've got a pretty strong history of basically being writing against neo-Nazis, and pretty much what I've been saying is that, if you want to look at it in the world for, who's pulling the strings, there's plenty of right-wing white people out there, and most of them you can find basically sponsoring the United Nations Agenda 2030 agenda. So, that's pretty much what I've turned around and actually, found is that we deal with each of these particular claims that get put out there, and when you turn around and actually investigate them, they just simply aren't there. It's frustrating because on one hand, most of these claims came out on day one. They were made by Mike Bush, the Commissioner of Police. They were stated as being confirmed. So we have a senior police officer telling us this is the confirmed information. Wasn't
Mike Bush also former New Zealand military?
Look, to be honest, I haven't done a background check on Mike Bush, but it's not uncommon to find that there's this revolving door going around. It is an interesting situation though, because what I have found, last 2 nights ago, I was in Brighton at about 5 o'clock, and there was a breaking news story that turned around and said that, oh my God, there's been a bomb. There's a bomb threat on Newcastle Street, which is just around the corner from the Mosque, just around the corner from Harris Street. I got there as quick as I could, and I got there at 6:02. When I got there, they were all packing up and going, and there were no military people around at the particular time. The whole scene was controlled by the police. They put it out, I think, I'd been at home having a beer for about an hour and a half when I think it was Newsfeed put out, live streaming feed, we'll keep you developed about, and this is a stream that they put out so that it's designed to be for the international media. The story was picked up by Turkish media, it was picked up by Al Jazeera. So this story was put out basically you couldn't fly over the area, they'd send in specialist units. It was written up to make it sound like there was a terrorist attack. Now, in my video at the time I did on the night, I turn around and I take a photo of a house. I just took a sign of a house that's on Linwood Ave, and about 3 years ago, the police walked into Linwood is the lowest socioeconomic area. At one point, there were at least 3 major gangs operating all within a block of each other. 3 years ago, police walked into this particular property. They walked straight up to a pile. They found a gun and they found some ammunition, and it belonged to a gang. And obviously they'd been tipped off by an informant, but that was what the deal was. It was nothing to do with terrorism. It was just criminal action. I made a video, made that point, and said, hey guys, we don't even know what this is. What's the context of it? So what I did was the following morning I went back to that street. I canvassed the street in question. I found people on the street, and I said, look, have you got any characters, or, any people that are, noteworthy on the street? So he pointed to a house which was basically across the road from this area where this package and ammunition were found. Guess what? It was being rented by gang members. That story and its gang connections hasn't been presented in the media. So what I'm basically trying to get across is that what we're witnessing is a bit of a power play by the police at the moment. They're really trying to kind of go for gold and run the show and try and get as much power and kudos as they possibly can. The military have actually largely been kind of kept out of the situation. I spoke to a person in relation to the Russian gentleman that died a few days afterwards due to, we'll get to that in a second. But
yeah, we've had a lot of questions about that.
For me.
And by the way, we've had our first super chat in for the night. There's $10 for us to share, Ben.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, guys. You'll be paying for my petrol tomorrow. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but basically we were talking about so basically what happened at the time was the military want to get involved, and the police said, no, we're running the show, we're going to call all the shots, and blah, blah, blah. This is going to get really interesting down the road because I think there's 84 charges there, but I think that the terrorism charge is still up actually in the air, and because the military were involved, it's going to create a real jurisdiction issue and if it creates a jurisdiction issue that the police are in charge, they may actually have trouble actually charging them on terrorism-related charges if it's a police situation and therefore jurisdictionally-wise a criminal issue. I don't know if anyone's actually gone out there and discussed that issues, but these are some of the things that we're actually, we're dealing with. The military were very much largely kept out on the frame on this particular time, and my feedback has been that, there are people in the military, trust me, that I certainly don't trust. I was in it for 6 years and I left for very, very good reasons, but at this stage, this particular operation, I think you'll find that the New Zealand military it can be largely exonerated of any kind of dodgy goings on. The main issue here has been that the police investigation. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, I might have just funny. Yeah, so the police investigation at this stage, yes, we've got one shooter. It's pretty established that we've got one shooter. My points of differences on that issue boil down to the silver Toyota that's in front of the mosque. Again, I'm going to ram home this point. It's a silver Toyota. It's in the very front place of the mosque, which I imagine is a prime parking space. There's going to be people within the Muslim community, and maybe our friend Max Elliott can help us flush this actually out a wee bit, who will go and know who that vehicle is. If it belongs to Pen Person or the mosque, please, we really want to know this information. The police sort of play this game where it's like, oh no, we're not going to share information, we've got to ban this, all that attitude does is it creates a world of absence of transparency in which suspicion and conspiracy grows. If you want to stomp out conspiracy and you want to stomp out right-wing, supremacists reacting to this stuff, then just be honest with us and give us information. And I don't think it's a particularly big deal to turn around and say, Muhammad, Mr. Wong, or whatever his name is, this is his vehicle, and we can put a picture of it, and he can turn around, and we can then go and from that go and talk to other people in the mosque and verify that, yes, he's a member of the mosque, and yes, he's had that vehicle. At the moment, we're not being given any of that stuff. So what we have is a vehicle where the guy points a gun at, point blank, so he definitely knows that the vehicle's there. He lets the vehicle drive out of the mosque. That does seem suspicious, and we have that issue, which that's my one of my key points I'm still working on. I think Max Egan's done very, very well to focus on it. What we now need to know is we've got a number plate. What we need to know is who that vehicle belongs to. The second issue basically goes to the point of where they arrested him, which is at 2:02 p.m. At 2:02, they arrest him. This is where at the same time the media's reporting, oh, there's a bomb in Strickland Street, and this bomb's at 3:30 p.m. The reality is Strickland Street and Brougham Street are so close to each other. I can understand the media mixing that particular point up. I can also understand that, when we're talking about a bomb, what we're actually talking about is the two petrol cans that had flares, basically sellotape to the side of the vehicles. They're not IEDs. They're not bombs. So the police turn around and call these devices bombs is a gross exaggeration. It's part of what I'm saying. It's part of this problem that they're playing this schizophrenic game where on one level they want us to believe that it's just a single individual person, and on the other hand they want us to believe it's a right-wing, conspiracy theory. And
if I may,
let's go back to this issue.
The New Zealand police are very, very well known for just making stuff up and exaggerating and that kind of thing. And we have just before you continue, we have a comment in here from Max Egan again. He said there was also a man in red standing against the wall inside the compound watching while he shot the last woman out the front, and he has a screenshot of that. So I also want to just take this moment to thank Max for his work there, because we've been unable to do that from here in New Zealand because we'd go to jail if we did. Yeah.
Well, we haven't, and it's been a very difficult part of the problem. As I said, I've been working with people from overseas who've been my eyes and ears, and I'll be really again frank. Like the person in red, which I'm aware of, but I haven't had any time to actually focus on. So at this stage, Max has this issue, which, as far as I'm aware, what I can say is, yes, there is a gentleman that at least he appears in red, and I just say that because of the whole video resolution. And again, I'm not trying to dispute Max, and just said it's on my get round to do list as opposed to me having spent any real time. But yes, I'll join Max and say that there is this individual there. Actually, likewise, we also have these two individuals that are right at the gateway when the shooter walks in. It's that one of them is clearly a non-white person, so would think he matches the target equation. Why the shooter doesn't shoot him, I don't know. And if I want to be my own devil's advocate, the only thing I can come up with is that the shooter is working to, like a bank robbery, he's working to a time schedule. So he's going, no, I'm not going to waste that, I'm going to do this, and he's working to that. So that person, just simply because, like in the video games, go, no, I'm going to stick to my script, gets off light. The person doesn't actually react along with his wife, who's wearing a burqa and has a back turned to us. He doesn't react. He seems very nonchalant. Again, on the surface, that seems very suspicious. But again, I was speaking to a friend of mine that is a Somali, and he's been in several wars, and he said to me, well, actually, when you're around people with guns and you're a civilian, he's fine, you actually learn that acting calm and sort of doing a whistling, it's actually sometimes the best way not to bring attention to. So and there were a lot of people in the mosque that actually had that issue, so maybe that's the explanation. But again, what the key thing there is that we've got an individual, or if you like, a person of interest. I think even though the video is quite blurry, there's enough from what colour clothing he's wearing to his height, his body shape. We should over time be able to put a person, if that person's at the mosque, to that. That's what I'm going to do. And I guess the difference between me and a lot of other people is that instead of me turning around and saying, this is what's going on, what I've been simply trying to do is get the information, go, oh, that's interesting, go and look at it, work my way through. And I've been actually taking, this is probably the very first time I've really gone out and expanded any material beyond what I've been doing on social media. We still have points of issue here, but when you look at in terms of there being more than one shooter, no, there isn't. There is a second issue which I will also address here, and again I'll just go back to your shout, and that's Jared Ford Manson. He clarified this to me. He confirmed this to me. I also spoke to, I think it's Mark Taylor, who's from Premium Tyres, and Mark's co-workers who also saw this. They were able to confirm to me that there was only one person in the vehicle when it drove away. There has been a story put out there from one of the survivors that turned around and said that there were people in the vehicle. That story appeared on, I think it's Focus Live, which is one of the New Zealand news channels out there. There is a name of that person. You can go away and look it up for it. So just go Focus Mosque Survivor. I think the issue is that's a fog of war in terms of the person at times, perceive this information, their mind's made up memory, because everywhere else that I talk to, I've got no confirmation of more than actually just one person being there. Now, again, your readers go, oh, no. Look, who knows? Maybe information comes down the road or whatever, but what I'm basically saying to the readers is that my sources to date on this is your shout, the guy that runs the place next door that's got a CTV camera, that's Jared Ford Manson. He's saying that there's only one person in the vehicle that drove away. He confirms it's also the Subaru that we see leaving the mosque, the same Subaru that we then see up on Brougham Street. Mark Taylor's guys from Premium Tyres confirm it. So in terms of actual direct witnesses, they're telling me no, only one particular person in that particular vehicle. So, when you turn around, and then again you turn around and you speak to other people, and they'll say, oh, no, there were gunmen and they were on the shop. Yes, there were. There were gunmen turned up very immediately. Like on the day that I was actually filming Prince William turn up, I spoke to a woman. She was actually there. She confirmed that basically there appeared to be guys in olive drab that turned up. They looked like they were from 3 Commando. Jared Ford Manson turned around and said, yes, there were police virtually on the scene. You'll notice on the screen that of when when Brenton Tarrant's vehicle is lifted off at Brougham Street onto the tow truck, you can see his number plate on that vehicle. That one, if you do a jammer on it now, it won't give you any information at all. It's been, you have to go right to the Ministry of Transport, but you'll see 3 perfectly bullets that are grouped perfectly in the windscreen, and according to Jared, those shots were fired at that particular time. So, that's how close it was according to the witnesses. He was literally pulling up when people did turn up, and it appears that the people that turned up first were the police, and they were guys from 3 Commando, which are the Australian guys that were training at St Margaret's Hospital. Now, again, people go, oh my God, that's coincidental. There were a counter-terrorism operation at the same time. Well, their counter-terrorism operation is actually a little bit of a problematic issue. On one level, you have the situation that I spoke to workers at the hospital, and they confirmed to me that the Armed Defenders Squad do regular counter-terrorism training at the hospital. That's on one side. So yes, we know that it's not unheard of for them to do an exercise at that location. It is, for those who want to, hold on to their tinfoil hats. And don't get me wrong, I wear my fair share of tinfoilery as well. That just behind the St Margaret's was the military headquarters, which was basically for World War II, where all the high brass in South Island used to locate. So it actually does have a very strange military history. It's also a perfect place if you were running some kind of, false flag operation to run a command post from. And thirdly, when you drive from that location, you keep going, and what it does is it kind of leads you in an arc, and it leads you directly back to West Milton, which is where the other part of the counter-terrorism operation exercise. And I know this area very well because I did a lot of my training at the West Milton Rifle Range. So your gunman was actually driving back to a place that does actually have an airstrip, not that, or a place that you could take a helicopter off. So, yes, you can turn around and say there are some things about that are quite strange. I'm, in my investigation, really, at this point of the day, I'm still only at Linwood Mosque. I'm sort of been kind of working at the Al Noor, and I've been working my way around the sort of 3 sides of the triangle. So, today, the Linwood sort of side of it was just where we concluded. So there's still a lot of stuff I want to go back and look at and so on. But pretty much what I'm telling you is we've got the same vehicle at all 3 locations. We've got the same person. Or in fact, I'm going to back that up just to speak factually correctly. We get a confirmation of Brenton Tarrant at Al Noor from his own live stream video. We get a confirmation of Brenton Tarrant, or at least the entity that's been presented as Brenton Tarrant at Brougham Street. We have a singular person that's at the location at Linwood who is in the same vehicle with the windows. I don't think that gets damaged later, but basically we have the same vehicle at that location around. So it seems, when you look at the whole issue of that methodology is called Occam's razor. When faced with 2 different scenarios, which are uncertainty, the one that provides the simplest explanation is normally the most probable. So Occam's razor is dictating that the dominant theory, the one that would make more serious, that this is the same guy, the same vehicle all the way through. I'm simply giving your readers the raw data as I've discovered it myself. So how they want to interpret that's entirely up to them. If they want to look at the whole issue, going back to this issue of the GoPro, again, we know you've just given you the brand. It's the GoPro 400 or the GoPro Hero. I've told you about the ability to turn around and do a resolution. Basically, you can refine the resolution by using software that's actually out there. It's up to your readers whether they just reject it out of hand because they've already latched onto a particular theory and they don't want to let go to it, or whether they turn around and they go and do it and then come up with their own conclusions once they've done that. I'm not responsible for what they do. My job is to give you the information as accurately as I possibly can and try and provide your sorry, I keep saying readers, I'm a print journalist, so your listeners with the tools so which they can actually go and check these things actually out. So again, I've given you names tonight, I've given you businesses, so it's up to your listeners whether they want to go and Google to find out whether those people, those businesses exist. If your readers and listeners are in Christchurch, it's up to you guys whether you do the same thing, which is what I've done, which is you got a name, you got an address, you just bowl up there and go and speak to the people directly. I'm sure the people are probably going to get a little bit fed up if half of Christchurch actually turns up. But that's their problem, not mine. God, us journalists are such colours cold bastards. So that's pretty much where we're actually at the stage. We get into a couple of other issues where I want to step back a wee bit. I want to look at the issue on terms of the Sri Lankan bombing. Now, the Sri Lankan government has turned around and told us that the event that took place on Easter was in retaliation for the Christchurch attack. That's simply not logistically possible. We have clarified and confirmed, and I think it's multiple governments now have actually stepped in. They've authenticated that they knew of an attempt from as early on as I think basically late March. You do not carry out multiple attacks using bombs, safe houses, disguises, in such a short time frame. It just simply cannot be done. So the Sri Lankan government are telling clearly a big porky, and I think that's quite significant. We might need to work out why they're saying that. What it basically does, however, shows you that no, the Sri Lankan, and I'll just clarify this, it shows you that no, they didn't do it in retaliation. They had planned this well in advance. It does, however, offer us another situation, which if we want to walk...
I just want to also mention there, but that just like Christchurch happened on the day of drills, the Sri Lankan attack also happened on the day of drills.
It did happen. It did happen in the days of drills, and not only did it happen on the days. I'm glad you actually mentioned it because they're one of the other established facts, and these are, we know that John Podesta was in New Zealand in the weeks beforehand. We know that he was talking about cybersecurity and how, we needed to tighten up on this, or there was going to be, we were a big juicy target. We know that his brother, Tony Podesta, is the founding chairman for an organisation called the Australian US Council. If you go to that website, you'll find that not only does that money go back to some very interesting companies and hedge funds that pretty much don't exist except for a couple of websites back to John Podesta's old locations in Washington. Sorry, Tom Podesta's location in Washington. But more significantly, it gives you a full board of directors. It shows you, who's involved, and it reads like basically a whole bunch of Bush, Clinton, the usual suspects kind of guys, but more significantly, it's got the sponsorship of companies like BAE Armaments. It's got the sponsorship of Lockheed Martin, who are obviously going to benefit greatly from this raised security threat issue, which coincides as the US military is very, very keen to have a larger military presence in the Pacific. By 2020, the US Navy hoped to have over 60% of their fleet based in the Pacific. The same situation with Sri Lanka. Samantha Powers was in there in November. Again, like John Podesta like John Podesta, they're having these governmental level meetings and connections, which is partly what the US Australian Council is designed to do. It's designed to set up backroom, private, discreet discussions, which is what its own website says. But these people are not actually active members of any particular government, so they really have no real jurisdiction and no real right to be there. But, we have Samantha Power saying, basically, if you don't tighten up on social media, terrible things are going to happen to Sri Lanka. So, yes, you have this very, very clear pattern. You also have this issue, again, this is me wearing my tinfoil now, not me stating the facts. We know that, Brenton Tarrant, when he did his travel locations, he went to all these places. He didn't start travelling to, I think, 2016, which is sometime quite well after his father's inheritance. So for 6 years, he didn't spend any money or wasn't doing, he just suddenly got the 1 day in 2 years, went off and did all his travelling. He went to all these different locations, and then he went to Pakistan, which is where he largely disappears. And there's some very interesting information which I want to follow up further on, which I think does have some, it's not just statement, because I see a lot of time people make statements that don't back them up, like this, I won't go there, but there does seem to be some interesting connections that Brenton Tarrant had some connections to an organisation in Pakistan that's got some very interesting survival connections and links to basically, they get your mind in a new place, let's put it that way. We also know that in terms of the Sri Lankan event, we know that there's a money trail which relates to one of the individuals, and that money trail goes back to the United Arab Emirates. I'm still working on that particular angle. I'm very struck by the multiple coordination of these events, especially the one in Sri Lanka, in terms of, we know this was a multiple event, and the way it was run and the way it was orchestrated, it almost runs as a mirror image to the Mumbai 2009 Mumbai attack, where they told us that was the work of 10 Islamic terrorists. One of the counter-terrorist people that was shot on the day that survived, and his boss, who was an ardent critic of the administration, their corruption, confirms on national TV that the Islamic Pakistani gunman spoke with a Punjabi Indian accent. We had the BBC. They gave us the name of three witnesses, one of them and who owned businesses, and they gave the name of the businesses. That included the Cafe Leopold, which is in the Mumbai Square. They described seeing at the time that the shooting occurred that aside from the supposed Islamic gunman, there was also two individuals at the Cafe Leopold that pulled out of their side bags automatic weapons. One was a European person, and the other one was a Japanese with a mohawk, so a very distinctive individual, pulled out automatic weapons, which basically it's very, very easy to destroy the Mumbai narrative, which attacked, just like we have here, a church and a mosque being attacked. We have a synagogue being attacked. We had two hotels being attacked. We had roving ambushes being done, and the story, the official narrative that was put down there, it just could not have actually happened. And it said, we had key witnesses speaking on national, international media, very, very clear, actually providing information which can be verified. In the Mumbai case, the people that were staying in the hotel, very interesting people. They were the European Union delegation, and they were actually discussing working at creating a world global currency system that was going to be based on the euro, supported by the Mumbai Mineral Exchange, by the Asian mineral market and the Iranian crude oil. So when this event occurred, which caused huge havoc to the Mumbai stock market at that time, it really killed that particular plan. So you pretty much will have, what was an act of economic warfare. And going back to Sri Lanka, I see very, very close parallels. And so if you do want to look at anything, I want to go back to this point of walking us through. Yes, the official explanation from the Sri Lankan government that the attack in Sri Lanka was in retaliation, we can prove that that was not the case. It doesn't mean that they weren't connected. What we may basically mean to work out is whether or not the people that were funding Brenton Tarrant, if at no point were ever provided authentication or documentation on what his actual source of income were, if they turn out to come from the same people, then we've got a very interesting game going on. And I mention this viewpoint from, it's not just me, running the theory from. Let's have a look at the geopolitical background at the time. It's not just Christchurch being attacked just before Anzac Day, a significant religious geopolitical historical date. We have this the mosque being attacked in Sri Lanka. We have the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which I've seen. Look, Notre Dame is one of those, again, on my to-do list. So I don't claim to be an expert on Notre Dame, but from what I actually have seen, including architects and bits and pieces, it does seem very strange. And it's just one of those. Oh, look, another major significant building of religious archetype pops up. We have this issue where we have a synagogue being attacked in the US. Turns out that one of the people involved was an FBI informant, which, when you know the history, you got to go, oh yeah, whatever. We have multiple targets that are all of a sudden being taking religious, and it seems to be basically the game plan seems to be divide and conquer.
That's
so
right.
It's not just these two events stand alone. It's the bigger picture. Now,
Ben, before you continue, we've had a $50 super chat in here for a box of beer each, mate.
As I said, once again, guys, you're paying my guest. Thanks, Steve. You're paying my guest tomorrow, and I really needed it. So thank you very much. The life of an independent journalist, it's all air jets and caviar, I tell you.
That's right, and I just want to remind people as well that I'm going to just basically tomorrow morning, just whatever money that you've donated tonight, I'm going to immediately give half of it to Ben tomorrow in the morning, so that he's got some money this weekend, even though the chats that you do send today, ladies and gentlemen, won't be paid through until probably next month. But yeah, regardless, Ben needs help down here, so any donations you can make, ladies and gentlemen, very much appreciated.
It is really appreciated, because basically what I've done is I've taken for you readers or your listeners, what I actually normally do is I run a newspaper which I put out 3 times a year around the South Island. I'm just a small town hick. I'm nothing big, but it's how I make my livelihood. And basically for the last month I have not managed to do a single sale because this has been taking up my entire time. So guys, this is really, really, really appreciated. And we can't do any of this stuff without you. And we've been going, but you're doing it for the donations. Like, guys, you want to come and live my lifestyle anytime you like. If I want to make money, there's a lot of things I can do a lot more easier than doing this. I assure you. I just simply, my degree's in political science. I studied counterterrorism 4 years at Canterbury University. I spent 6 years in the military. I have written about national security and democracy issues for as long as I care. When this event occurs in your own backyard and in your own town, and you're actually in a position where you can actually go and knock on doors because you know the people, you know how to react to them, and if you don't know, you can pick up the phone and get someone else to do an introduction. I couldn't not come and do this. And, and I sort of feel like it really, really mixed emotions today because, after speaking to, Jared Ford Manson, at that point I thought, we've got them, we've got police, we're proving the police are lying. And then you turn around and you're going to go, well, actually, no, that's not, you're the real mixed reaction, because it kind of like, you always have to check yourself when you're doing this, that you form opinions and then you've got to try and emotionally not be attached to them. Because I was starting to form a mind, this is how it was. And then, just literally, it was pretty much like a stroke of luck, in the sense of I walked through the right door, but not a stroke of luck in terms of that's what I've been doing for the last month, to be able to get a bit of information where you can actually corroborate it, and then say, well, actually, this is simply the truth, and that's all I'm simply out here to do. If you want my opinion on it, what I believe is, if we get past the issue of Max Egan and the silver Toyota, which I think is right now the strongest lead that we've got, and we really, again, I must have said this 4 times and I'm going to say it again because it's that important, we really need to find out who owns that vehicle. That's pretty much moved up to the top of my list at this stage. And I'm a little bit annoyed that I kind of have to leave.
I do want to actually elaborate on that, and we also have Claire Swinney join us in the chat room as well. FQH875 is that license plate, ladies and gentlemen. Now, some searches have been made.
It's not a Q, it's an O. If you do a jam checker, yeah. And in fact, let's just say, guys, you've heard both the numbers, check them both, and if you want a source for that, there's a thing out there called Car Jammer. And again, it allows you to turn around. And again, if you go online, you can actually find there's a very good picture of Brenton Tarrant's vehicle being lifted. The number plate's very, very clear. So those are the best sources out there that will give you, confirm at least the make of the car. we are at this point where we still can't quite get through to who owns the vehicle, because we're really, again, legislative issues of privacy issues. But I am working on that, and I'll give me another 2 weeks. I'm hoping. Again, there is another. In some ways, I'm reluctant to say this because I'm kind of playing my card, but in New Zealand, the way it works is whether you turn around and you register, you can actually turn around and choose to be just simply, not registered. It's not registered, but you can choose to be not heavy details or heavy details. It's about a 50-50 split. So even when I turn around and I get through to the next barrier, it's not a guarantee that I will actually have a name, but that's the venue which I'm going to be doing. I've seen where I can potentially get that information, so that's where I'm going to be looking next. Anybody else out there, it's like, again, let's say that number plate, let's make sure you get a still of that Maxi and put that actually up there, because it's our wanted poster for the moment. We need to know whose vehicle that actually is. And it's going to do one or two things. We are going to find out that it belongs to somebody in the mosque. And again, put this in this context, people. There's 100, in fact, there's 500 people that go to that mosque. I think at least 500. And this is Christchurch. And I went to university in this town for 12 years. I went from 1980s until the 1990s, being backwards and forwards. But what I'm basically saying is, I know lots and lots of people in this town, and if there's somebody out there from the mosque that comes forward and says, oh, it's mine, I'm going to be able to very, very quickly, easily verify whether or not they are, and I will make sure I come back for any particular person, and I give you at least, and this is my promise to you on the show right now, I will provide you with 4 people, their names, their businesses they work with, and ways that you can go and check that information yourself, because this is what I'm attempting to do, is don't take my word, and I stress this, don't take my word, I'm simply trying to give you the tools to go and check it out yourself. But right now, that vehicle is our key to this whole thing, I think.
Yeah, I've got this whole element that's been running around in my head while you've been speaking, is that we're now a NATO country, and Operation Gladio basically only happened in NATO countries, whatever, and essentially these were big-time terrorist assassination events set up by a state, more or less, in order to get people into the European Union or secede their sovereignty and things of that nature. But that's not the point I'm trying to get at. The point I'm trying to get at is that after a Gladio operation, they had an incredible disinformation machine that would confuse all the journalists and the people reporting on the attacks.
Well, I do, and I'm really glad you brought it up, Vinny, because I'll just walk people through this. Operation Gladio was originally set up in the 1950s, and it was set up by our favourite man, this is where we always forget this guy, we shouldn't, Henry Kissinger. He set up the Gladio movement. What it actually did was what they were trying to do was they were trying to create a resistance army, so that if the Soviet Union invaded the West during the Cold War, they'd have armed partisans ready to fight the new evil empire. They made one small mistake, that Gladio largely recruited from basically former members of the Third Reich, or from at least fascist movement. They created cells all around Europe. Norway actually had one, and there's actually the guy that led the Norwegian attack. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they actually made a movie about this particular guy, and then they made a little story fictional thing about this guy sort of carrying out this attack against these far leftists on an island, which pretty much will mirror the events of Norway pretty damn closely. In Spain, the movement was called Gull. In, I think it was Belgium, it was called Le Circle, and in Italy it was called Propaganda Duo, P2, led by a former member of the fascist organisation called Alessio Gilli. P2 tried to make itself out to be a Masonic movement, so just like, unconfirmed by the way, but apparently, although no, it's not unconfirmed, because Brenton Tarrant makes out himself that he was a member of a Masonic movement, the Knight Templars. So did Andrew Breivik. They tried to make out that they were Freemasons, but in actual fact they were never actually, their Freemason pedigree was not of any of the main lodges. That's probably the accurate way to say it.
Can I
but
just
they
interrupt?
Did that deliberately because...
just for 2 seconds here, we've had another $40 donation in here from Steve Brighouse, who says we've got a box of beer each and a tinny each. So thank you, Steve. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, you know my taste very well, Steve.
And by the way, YouTube, just to clarify, please don't take my channel. Please don't take my channel. So anyway, go ahead, Ben.
Well, okay, okay, so what they did was they set up, it wasn't just a partisan movement. It was designed to run agent provocateur attacks. It was designed to recruit, blackmail people. It was designed actually to run a psychological operation. Now, in 1980, one of the people that attacked also very, very significant to what's going on here. In fact, majorly significant, and we are looking at a geopolitical that beyond Brenton Tarrant being just a sole lone nihilist. What we had was this alt-right-wing organisation, which has modern ties right now. What they turned around and they did was they assassinated the Prime Minister or the Premier of Italy at the time, a guy called Aldo Moro. The people that were blamed for it at the time was the left-wing Red Brigade organisation, or Brigata Rosa. Brigata Rosa did carry out the attack. That's confirmed. But what we only found out when they had the corruption trials, which unearthed P2, was that P2's, this Gladio cell, were working on this thing called the politics of tension. And what it was trying to do was divide and conquer the people of Italy. And the reason why they were the ones that actually ordered the assassination. They originally paid the Italian mafia, who in then turn outsourced, that's funny as it sounds, to Brigata Rosa to kill Aldomoro. And they killed him not because he was perceived to be far right, not perceived to be far left, but because he was conceived to be a moderate. The whole goal of this attack was to divide and conquer, just like, I believe, the attack against the guys who did Charlie Hebdo. Charlie, am I pronouncing it correctly?
It's Hebdo. Hebdo, yeah.
Hebdo. Okay, so these are the guys that put out a satire magazine. Its principal goals were that all religions are stupid and that religions, and I'm not saying they are, I'm just pointing out that that was the editorial style, and they specifically always pointed to this right-wing organisation, which they always used the Illuminati or the Eye of, to point out that this right-wing organisation, which mirrors very much the Gladio model we're operating on. Fast forward to the modern day, when there's I think it's called Voltaire. There's a website out there that they've done some very, very brilliant work pre the attack. I think going back at least 2 years, they've been showing with very, very good material that Gladio is very much back. It's part of the NATO organisation. They've been basically integrated themselves into, there's a specific individual, if you go and read the article, that's integrated themselves into the President of France's security detail, Macron. Gladio is running basically the campaign against the Yellow Vest movement. Gladio were a joint ranger, Italian Rangers and US Special Forces were deployed to Fort Derby, which is on the Italian border, 10 hours drive from Paris on March the 5th. So what we have is we can confirm deployment of Gladio movements before these events. What we now know as well is that I think they're called the Black Watch, but they're an anarchist movement, have just also moved into Paris pretty much this weekend. Problem with the Black Watch guys, and again, like I'm going off the memory, like this stuff I've only been reading like yesterday, is this is an organisation that goes, for decades now, people have been seeing this particular anarchist group climbing out of police vehicles and sharing cigarettes with the police before riots occur. So they are very much a provable agent provocateur, and these people have been moved into Paris, which is one of the things I've been saying earlier on the piece, is that if this was a Gladio-styled attack in terms of the person that was running our single gunman and our Sri Lankan attack, I've been saying that basically one of the prime events that we would start to watch we'd start to see events take place in Paris, where the idea would be to divide and conquer the Yellow Vest movement, which has, by the way, 80% of the French people's support. So,
hey, interesting.
This is the person that,
Interesting statistic, 80% of people wouldn't be upset if they lived next to somebody of a different race, but 20% would be. In England, only 1%. But before you continue, I've just got to go take a WikiLeaks, so just continue talking, Ben. I'm just going to switch the camera to you, and I'll be right back in momentarily.
Well, it's quite funny, because now I'm going, who am I going to talk to? Anyway, okay, so 80%, basically what we're looking at is a situation where the strategy, what I forecast would be, there would be clear moves from these particular units that we're going to be divided in conquering the Yellow Vest movement. This is the thing, again, when we look at the sort of schizophrenic narrative that we've been running, we're saying, oh, no, this, yes, it's a single gunman, but at the same time, he's got links to right-wing extremists. The right-wing extremists, look, they do exist. They're in Christchurch, there's people like Carl Chapman who dress up in Nazi suits and go see Carl. They're idiots. They're morons. The so-called organisation, international group that Brenton Tarrant's been tried to relate to. Yes, again, there's I've just been explaining to you. One of them is this organisation called Gladio that is sitting right next to the people that are pointing the fingers, going, "Look out for the right-wing extremists." Well, the right-wing are the ones that are actually running this whole deal. And so that's kind of the joke about this whole situation. We prior to all these particular events occurring on March the 5th, there was a lot of media attention starting to take place on things like the Agenda 2030, which is the whole way we're going to turn around and we're going to respond to this issue of climate change and climate degradation. Again, my opinion is I'm actually quite okay with this. I was just talking about how the narrative is like, look out for the right wing, white right-wingers. I'm going, well, that will be because the people that are telling us to look out for the right white-wingers are the right-wingers. So I was talking about how we're talking about Agenda 2030 and some, all these ideas about how we're going to combat climate change. But then when you turn around and you actually look at who's sponsoring Agenda 2030, oh, look, it's Coca-Cola, by the way, the same people that sponsor Tom Podesta's US-Australian Council. It's Lockheed Martin, it's BAE Armaments, it's Monsanto, it's Bayer. So there was a lot of really good work being done, especially from the 1080 movement before this whole event occurred, which was showing that, when they were turning around and trying to point out that anybody that didn't, agree with what we should do with 1080 or with climate change was the right winger, well, the people that are actually saying this are actually our people that traditionally come from this so-called not so-called, they are right-wing, and they are fascists, and they are predominantly white old dudes, and that's it. So we've got the white old dudes going, look out for the white old dudes, basically, in a nutshell. Then we get into this issue, moving forward to another issue which we've been dealing with, which is still, is the conspiracy of the Brenton Tarrant shooting from the domestic viewpoint isn't so much about whether he was one gunman or multiple, because, I think we can pretty much state now that we've got one guy. The issue is basically them turning around and say it's the political exploitation of the situation. Because of a guy that we have no actual established terrorist connections to, who wasn't a New Zealander, who only managed to get hold of firearms because this government, this current administration, changed the law so that he could make it actually happen. These are the ones that now turn around to us and saying, "Oh no, we mustn't have semi-millimeter, automatic weapons." Which, by the way, I don't like, and I didn't think they should ever be there to begin with. But if you also look at the legislation, that legislation gives the government the time to step in at any stage and extend it beyond that. So, what you're finding is that the people that are actually utilising the situation are actually using it to keep us away from things like, let's discuss the TPA, which nobody seems to talk about anymore. Let's not discuss the 1080 issue, which is, largely been media shut down. It's all about, let's go after the right wing and these extremists, and these extremists. And that's what really worries me, which brings us to the other issue. As, Vinny will verify, we've just recently been contacted by Sam Sherwood of Stuff.
It's the press in Christchurch, which is owned by Stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. So, Sam's got a very reputation of always having very good relationships with the police. And he rang me, and he rang you independently, and he didn't tell me that he was ringing you, and I imagine he didn't tell you that he was ringing me. No. And he said, are you on the list? And you went, I should hope, I most certainly hope so. And I went,
one can only hope.
Don't care. Yeah. Well, my issue, which Sam and the rest of the media in New Zealand haven't been concerned with, is per se, when there has been a major terrorist attack, I don't have a problem with police putting out a list which looks at people who have a history of violence and even affiliations with the Pacific. I mean, to be fair, Brendan Tarrant was wearing a neo-Nazi symbol on his backpack. It's a logical conclusion. But they added on this bit at the end saying, and we're also looking at anybody that's critical of the New Zealand police. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. This is the thing which bugged me, was the situation was, at what point does the police have the right to turn around? And we've already seen this happen. We saw this with Thompson and Clark. Instead of turning around and using all these private security agencies and government agencies, and there's billions of dollars which were spent since 9/11 to turn around and actually go and look for actual neo-Nazi terrorists, what we did was we turned around and we spied on people in Christchurch that weren't happy with the Earthquake Commission's handling of issues. We spied on people that belong to Forest and Bird. I mean, for God's sake, we're talking about people in sandals who wear bad jerseys being spied on for being potential terrorists. We spied on people within the 1080 movement. We spied on people in our own government. I have lots of negative things to say about the Green Party, trust me, but they are part of our government, and yet we allowed this culture to occur. And unfortunately, this current event is now allowing the police to go back, to take back what we were starting to make them, a deal with, and say, oh no, we can go around and spy on who we want, whether we've actually got any reasonable grounds, or whether simply because they actually don't like us and want to question the status authority. Yeah. It's the same situation we've got the situation with the judiciary.
What was it calling? The Terrorism Suppression Act. When I recall when I first started doing this whole gig here, everybody was really concerned about that. They'll spy on everyone. They'll do it for their own reasons, and they'll just politically target anybody who threatens the government's agenda. And the government's like, no, we would never do that. What?
and yet that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm saying to you, like the wording, if you look at the narrative, first they had us whipped up about, Muslim terrorism after 9/11, and the Muslim community were ruthlessly persecuted. I'm actually, I'm pretty much like the guys from Charlie. I think my own particular viewpoint is organised religion is all pretty absurd. I don't have a particular problem I've never had any issues with the Muslim people. The only group I've ever actually had any real issues with is Wahhabi Islam, which is tied to the Saudi Arabia. And the issue isn't even Wahhabi, it's the Saudi Arabian government. My issue tends to be with actual governments and actual individuals, not what they choose to actually believe in. And yet, we're now moving to a situation where what you choose to believe in, today it's right-wing extremists. In fact, the wording is quite important. It's right-wing and extremists. Well, what's an extremist precisely, And this is what we're hearing. It is always this "and" tagged onto it. We are in some really, really worrying times right now, and it behooves us, anybody in the media, not to actually let this go away. And I'll just, if you just let me quickly intercede, Vinny, I also want to bring the issue of what's happening with the trial. Right now, we actually haven't had a chance to see Brendan Tarrant really at all, because every time he knows you're not allowed to film it, and the whole thing is, no, we don't want you seeing that, we don't want you seeing that. I actually have an issue with it. Originally, I was like, no, I don't want to see the guy even. Now I'm like, well, actually I do. I want to find out who this person is, and I want to know everything about him. I also have this issue where the media has now been told, the first day one was, I went to go and cover the trial. I've been working as running my own newspaper for over 15 years. I've worked for Investigate magazine. I've written best-selling books. I think I can legitimately, as judges have throughout murder trials, 1080 situations, have accepted that I have a legitimate role when I walk into a courtroom and I go to that little spot where the journalists are. Not this case. No. Now I had to have media court-approved credentials with this legislation, which I've got to go back and check in, because I think it's relatively new, where to have media credentials, you've got to belong to this thing called the New Zealand Media Council, which basically is controlled by people who are from corporate vested interests. So, they're deciding who actually gets to be part of their little club, and then only the judge will only allow corporates to be there. I think that's a really, really the nature of fascism. I don't think people quite often forget about this. Is fascism is actually the partnership between government and corporate bodies. It's actually part of what the political definition is, and this is literally what we are seeing by this move in the judiciary to only allow accredited journalists approved by corporate bodies. It's part of this whole Agenda 2030 where only the corporates get to decide, the people with the checkbook, what kind of democracy we have. I beg your pardon. And this is the same situation. All the things when you read, and unfortunately, Greg, I can't remember how to pronounce your name, but if anyone's out there, let them know that Greg Fullmoon, who's a man that I have clashed fast and furiously with over the TPA, but he's been doing, Greg Fullmoon, if you look up the name, you'll find his real name. Go and have a look at what he's talking about with the Royal Commission. Go and have a look at what he's been saying about the court procedure. If I've been leading the field work, I'm going to give credit to a man that I've absolutely at times despised and spat upon, but he's done absolutely sterling work on the judiciary side of it. And he's been basically pointing out that what we're doing is we're having a court that is now deciding getting to control the media at the same time. And that is incredibly dangerous. I'm also very, I've got a lot of work to do, and this is probably where I'll be going next. But I'm starting to suspect that some of these things that we've actually got in the court process, how the courts are actually controlling the media, they're actually quite constitutionally questionable. And this is our next issue, where our problem is in New Zealand as a Commonwealth country, everything falls down to the issue of the definition of human rights. And this is what ultimately did stop those nasty little ISDS or investment settlement state dispute clauses being passed through, which was the Canadian Indians agreed with me when they said this is actually can't do that, that's unconstitutional, and they put a pause on it. But what we're now looking at the situation where those clauses depend upon the definition of human rights, which currently works in the Western world predominantly on a Commonwealth model based upon the Magna Carta. If we, however, move to a model which predates the Magna Carta, to a Catholic model, what it does is it means that our laws are now based on interpretation that the law of God is not determined by your peers of 12s or your equals. That becomes defined by one single entity. And if you can get all three religions on board, well, what a wonderful way that'll be.
I want to. The point is. Oh, sorry. Finish your point, and I've got a couple of things to say.
I'm basically turning around and saying that we now have this issue where constitutionally, our governments, and Margaret Wilson, who's a former Attorney General for the Labour government, has stated this quite clearly. We've had governments on both sides of the House in New Zealand for 25 years now have been passing legislation, which I would include some of the stuff that comes out about media control, that's basically unconstitutional. I mean, and on that issue, we've had judges, David Fisher versus the Crown, saying that a book is not a form of authentic journalism, so the journalist isn't protected by journalism protection. Well, I'm sorry, but go into a Pulitzer that. And yet, this is where we have this culture in New Zealand, and it's really solid, and internationally it's getting known, where we're having judges making verdicts and decisions which go beyond their jurisdiction, which basically means they're in contempt of their own court, and that's a very, very serious charge.
So, a couple of things to add on to this. So there was John Key, who came and he passed a whole lot of these laws, and then it was Jacinda who actually implemented them and started using them.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. And that's been things like, that's been one of the scapegoats of, this neoliberal tag team thing. No, but it's not Jacinda's fault because, Jacinda turned around and she's just simply having to stuck with what John Key turned around and permitted. Well, it's Jacinda that's hanging out with Marquand, the man that has actually given his police the right to shoot, to kill on his own citizen who is called in the army. That's Jacinda's on here. She can't run away to John Key and blame cry foul on that. Jacinda Ardern, and remember New Zealand is very famous for our nuclear-free stance. Earlier this year in February but I'm gonna bring a major point home because I nearly missed it. But earlier this year in February, the New Zealand government gave permission for a US B-52 nuclear bomber. I repeat, nuclear bomber. It's there. Its primary function is to carry nuclear weapons to come and visit the Waihopa Warbird show. Oh, it's just a wall show. Who gives a damn? In that single motion, what they actually turned around and allowed them to do was bring in a vessel which actually has the means to carry nuclear weapons, and they didn't challenge them. So it was under Jacinda Ardern's watch that she chose to kick New Zealand's nuclear-free stance into touch, and she can't go running away to Johnny to blame that on national government, you know. And it's also under Jacinda's government, we were having an inquiry into whether or not the New Zealand SAS carried out war crimes in Afghanistan. Nicky Hager, who my only beef with Nicky is he's a very sensible person. He's built his career around basically working within the parliamentary establishment, so he pulls his punches harder than I do, but he's done sterling work and has a very, very, very good reputation. Nicky turned around and did a speech at Otago University, which I was in the room with, and he made a statement which I disagreed with him at time, and I had we had a few questions and give and take, and he said that the New Zealand SAS was setting themselves up to be the primary, and this is this whole counter-terrorism, paramilitary, so we stop actually having defence model that's based on what New Zealand's need, and it just becomes basically America's bitch. It was setting itself up to become the senior arm of the military. Now, the inquiry would have probably put a damper on it if it had been found out that the SAS were actually good at war crimes. It would have put the dog back on its leash where it needs to be. That inquiry has vanished. In all of this Mosque shooting, we hear nothing about that inquiry. The last thing we heard about that inquiry was that the witnesses were pulling out and they were going to go and take the government to court because basically the government, Jacinda's government, was, while she's running around wearing a hijab saying, oh, we have so much sympathy for the Muslim people, was actually carrying out a cover-up on war crimes and at the same time integrating itself into this Five Eyes even further. The same time that this mosque shooting was going on, we had the launch from Rocket Lab of a data satellite designed to basically boost propagation from ground signal weapons for second-generation electron-based weapons. That's the stimulation of electrons in the upper atmosphere, which has huge military consequences. It may, in fact, be the second largest development in warfare since the atomic weaponry. And that happened on our ground in New Zealand on a base that has increasingly, at the very beginning when I turned around and said, oh, it's a military base, you know, all the Labour and all the, you know, the soft left guys turned around and said, oh, no, that's a conspiracy theory. We're at a point now where everybody, even those guys are going, oh, actually, Ben's got a point. Actually, that is a major military facility. They can't hide it anymore. But because of this current, that's been forgotten about.
Well, that's why, you know, when you brought up Occam's razor before, I've got one that's called Fuckham's razor, where there's two possibilities. One sounds really nice and you hope it was true, and one sounds fucking horrible and you wish it wasn't true. Yeah. That's usually the one that is.
And that has generally been, you know, that has been the case. And you know, like, there is another issue which, you know, I've turned around and I have tonight basically legitimised the police timeline. I know I'm going to get flack for that. You know, guys, if you can really, and not just this, you're wrong, but, you know, show me ways where that's not the case.
Well, who gives a shit being a fact's a fact? You know, well, there's two things you can't argue with. There's two things you can't argue with. You can't argue with facts, and you can't argue with results, and you've got both. So if anybody wants to argue, shut the fuck up! Just shut the fuck up! All right, so go ahead.
And that's why I come on your show, Vinny. You know, the point I'm basically making, however, is that this is the event that occurred. There is no doubt about the fact that the facts, as we're talking about, that yes, this situation has been politically exploited. Yes, this has been actually not just politically exploited, but on a number of veins, it has all been very much prepared in advance. For example, you know, the new police agency was set up in January. There's early on in the piece, one of you guys sent me an email saying that it was an in-house memo basically saying that arms legislation was going to be potentially the primary issue of this coming election. They knew that in January. How the hell did they know that? You know, so when again you look at the situation of, you know, Mosque attack in Sri Lanka, attack the highly likely situation of Notre Dame, all these other particular events, as you said, the Whakame's razor, I'm going to borrow that, by the way, I'm going to use it quite frequently from now on. The Whakame's razor principle basically indicates that that's just a little bit more of a coincidence. You know, some people choose to be coincidence theorists. They stick their thumbs in their mouth and they go, mwah, mwah, mwah. I don't. I am a conspiracy theorist, but I base my arguments upon facts, and I base them upon Occam's razor, which is basically common sense.
Yeah. However, I've dubbed it platinum sense, because platinum is the rarest metal on Earth, and frankly, it's very, very rare to have fine common sense, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to also put this out there, that if you do want to support Ben Vidgen, please go to the description in this video here, and you'll find his bank account number in there. And I want people to think about this. If you've got journalists in your country that are actually doing the work that the mainstream media should be doing, but they're not getting paid, then, ladies and gentlemen, you become the employer, okay? People are giving me $5 a week, $200 a month, whatever they can afford in order to keep me financed so I can continue doing this show. And I think that the same can be done for Ben, so I want to encourage people to find his bank account in the description of this video and set up an AP, whether it's a couple of dollars a month, $1 a week, it doesn't matter. Something is always better than nothing.
And that is absolutely true. You know, and down the road we are actually looking at establishing a radio show myself, so I've just been working on it. And it's so absolutely vital. It's absolutely essential in this day and time that, you know, we are looking at a government that's talking about introducing regulation of social media, which will be controlled by corporations. You know, we have our paper costs, and this is my major baby, our paper costs jump quite considerably in New Zealand all the time. It makes it harder and harder to actually run an independent paper. We have, you look, you know, I was doing stuff I broke, you know, in this story, I was the first one to turn around and pointed out that the weapons that were used, 4 of the 6 weapons, we still don't know who 2 of the weapons belong to, were bought from Gun City, from David Tipple, and I had a very extensive file, and I broke that story, you know, just ahead of the ODT, were the next people to actually turn around and produce, you know, highlight this particular information. I put this information actually out ahead of the curve because I have studied this subject for a very, very long time, but it's become harder and harder to do so because we have a corporate environment which is controlling the entire narrative, and increasingly so. So, you know, it's also this interesting situation right now where it's like, you're in this world that, you know, your show deals with all sorts of wonderful subjects, you know, aliens, extraterrestrials, behavioural modification, and I go around the university, this Labour you know, their foot soldiers, and going, oh, he's right wing, oh, that's all conspiracy theory. You know, I'm a little bit mystified because I'm an old school punk rocker and hippie. This was a subject that us left wingers used to. You know, I haven't changed what I believe in or what I find interesting. Only thing that's actually changed is the definition of what's left and right these days. And the moment we're not able to actually have environments where we can turn, I mean, you know, it's even really strange. Actually, funny you just think about this, because another little, you know, point I made out is that since January or December this year, I've now spotted up to 12 new articles in the Main Street stuff that are now saying that, oh no, UFOs do exist and they should be taken seriously, which is like, I'm sorry, you just spent the last 5 years begging us and calling anybody that believes in the subject of aliens nuts. And now overnight, you've changed your narrative. I find that a little bit strange. I personally would love to believe in little green men. Unfortunately, what I do note is that the place where they're talking about these supposed UFO sightings occurring off the coast of Kaikoura via Coromandel, gosh, guess what? It just happens to be where you've actually got had back in the time when we saw the UFOs back in the 70s, we were doing research into stimulating the electrons in the upper atmosphere, and that's what we're doing now. And this is where we suddenly see the UFOs. So, yeah, I see little green men, mainstream media, but my little green men are wearing khaki and don't go nanu and come from Mars. But it is interesting how...
I do want to add onto that as well, because Project Bluebeam classified was able to project holograms in the sky. Now, theoretically, a fake alien invasion could be staged. Everybody huddles together and goes, oh dear God, there's evil aliens. We obviously need a world government and a world army army and a world fascist dictatorship in order to fight them, and then we fight them, we beat them. Great! Can we dismantle the world army and the world fascist dictatorship? No, sorry. It's she's good by all it is.
Well, exactly. I mean, and the thing again is, 5 years ago that would have seemed absolutely absurd, and people now will go, oh, he's blue, he's talking about, hoax, fakes, so now it doesn't. And this again goes to this whole issue about, I go back to June of 2030. I come from a skiing family. We love our planet very, very, very deeply. We totally support the fact that a lot of the things that we're doing are actually causing terrible harm to the planet. My problem, however, is that when I look at who actually funds Agenda 2030, it's some of the biggest warmongers, polluters, genetic modified people. It is an absolute hoax. It doesn't take too much. Once you turn around and actually go and read the United Nations Summit material, which works like, you realise that these people don't give a shit about the planet. And so it is really, it's again like, we shouldn't go, oh my God, it's conspiracy theory. I'm 50 years old and had the benefits of a classic education. So back when I was in university, if you were an intellectual and you were educated, you read Aldous Huxley, you read George Orwell, you read Arthur Koestler's The Call Girls. These are books that were written in the after the Second World War by my major university laureates, people that were considered thinkers of themselves, and they said, this is where your planet's going to end up. And you know what? They largely actually pretty much all got it right. So if you want to say, oh, no, that's crazy ideas, well, I'm sorry, I'm sticking with the guys that I was told in the 1950s were forward-thinking, educated people, because, again, I haven't changed my viewpoint. Only thing that's actually happened is that corporate-controlled narrative is now telling us what to think. When it comes to the issue of mass surveillance, spying on people is one thing. What this is doing is it's more than that. It's controlling the algorithms, and that's what I was going to go on about the David Tipple issue beforehand. Was that? So I wrote the story. It has been good enough in the sense of that basically I handed my entire dossier over to Al Jazeera, and they've been doing their own stuff on David Tipple, but they came to me first, so that's what they thought of my material. And they wrote was the issue of I've just lost my train of thought, but what I was trying to basically allude was with the David Tipple situation was that they were attempting to tell us one thing when the reality was another situation.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So it's the problem is that David Tipple thing really bugs me because I keep coming to this point and then I kind of go, I lost my point again. So we'll hopefully come out of this before the third time. But yeah, it's been a very, very long week. And,
people don't know who this David Tipple guy. People don't know who this David Tipple guy is. But more the fact he's actually quite well known in certain circles in this country, right?
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, David Tipple is a guy that I came across when I was researching my first book called State Secrets in 1999. And I came across a piece into the Wellington Peace Research Movement, which is my left wing. When I was a student, and what left wing was left wing, and it connected that he'd actually been selling he'd been helping supply automatic weapons to Chinese Norinco assault rifles to the same people that were providing weapons to the right wing death squads in Nicaragua. Since then, he has had numerous run-ins with the police. He spent a year incarcerated in the US for infringement of gun laws. And he's just generally, this whole issue again about the gun control. If you cleaned up the gun clubs and you got rid of a few of the rogues in the area, I don't suspect we'd have half the weapons that actually we have out on the street now. And this is the sort of information that we turn around and I provided to the Al Jazeera, and pretty much, it's been quite interesting because at the same time as I'm not a big fan of David Tipple, and he's been really slaughtered in this whole situation, he has actually raised some points which I kind of actually have to, as much as I don't like the guy, actually agree in terms of, the issue isn't actually about the public having access to automatic weapons. It's a question about whether or not actually the licensing process is actually done, whether the police actually go out and look at it. And more importantly, we've just turned around and seen 11 weapons walk out of a police station because apparently the police don't know how to secure weapons, and they've walked straight into the hands of the gangs. The legislation which we put through doesn't actually make us a safer society. All it actually does is it makes it, increases the amount of money you can make as selling weapons illegally, so therefore it makes them a desirable product for the underground to have. So it actually stimulates growth of the criminal elements to have weapons. It gives us police running around with lots and lots and lots of weapons. A new super crack SAS, they've got more powers, more mass surveillance, and yet it doesn't actually make things any particular safer. And that is actually my final collect up to what I was trying to say. So on the day I ran that story on David Tipple, I think my hit ratio on my website for that particular time it peaked. It went well over 10,000 on one day. The next day, it dived to under 100, which was even, well under what it normally runs along at, and it hasn't moved ever since because someone has to turn around with the algorithm, and they've just turned around and they've switched it, so that's not actually a website that will actually come up when people go looking for it. My website's Post-Round Productions, Deadline TV, Ben Vidgen. Go and find it, but it's not going to naturally turn up when you put those things by themselves because algorithm-wise, I've been pushed to the bottom. My social media page, I run a social media page which I haven't really used in quite some time.
Ben, actually, just before the show, I was setting up the live stream and wanted to grab your website. It took a long time after searching Ben Vidgen to actually find your official website on that algorithm, mate.
Yeah, I know. It's like everything that's on my front page. State Secrets, and I wrote State Secrets in 1999, which is largely everything, at the time, it was conspiracy theory. You've heard it today now. People go, oh, yeah, we accept that.
Oh, by the way, Ms. Spacecake has given us a $2 super chat in there. Thank you, Ms. Spacecake. Ben, are you still there? Seem to have lost him. Well, you might be on mute there, Ben. Phone out of battery, perhaps. Oh, goodness, that's not good. Okay, we'll just check this thing. Yeah, Ben seems to have dropped off. Let's get him back. Like that. Add him. Do. You don't have Skype credit. Oh, whoopsie doopsie. Let's add some Skype credit then. There we go. So sorry about this, folks. Okay. Let me try that again. Your order was successful. Very nice. Okay, so let's add him again. Add. One moment, please, folks. So sorry about this. Ran out of Skype credit in the middle of the call.
Oh,
sorry, bro. I ran out of Skype credit in the middle of the call, so I had to just top myself up. And now we're back. Independent
media, huh? Okay, so what I was basically saying was my social media page now actually works backwards. So when you like it, actually the counter goes backwards. So what you basically got, the problem with things like Jacinda and Macron's, we're going to turn around and have greater control over social media, is it's actually not controlling the mass surveillance, it's thought police. And it's the same situation where we find, Samantha Fox turning around telling Sri Lanka, get your shit together or else, you will pay the price. This is what we're up against now, is that these people actually control the what's public opinion. And that's the story. That's the story that our media should be running, and not just turning around and going, well, oh, golly gosh, this could be a good thing. It'll stop all those right-wing and extremists. There's a software out there. When they ran the Cambridge Analytica story, which was again about Facebook, they only ran half the story. Cambridge Analytics also involved a company called Palantir, which is run by a guy called Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel also owns property in Queenstown, as do Richard V. Allen, the former National Security Advisor under Ronald Reagan, who I had the pleasure of once tried to sue me and lost miserably. You've got a number of spooks. You've got James Covert. But Palantir, what Palantir actually did, which was the story of the Cambridge, which never really saw the light of day, he named it after that orb that appears in the movie Lord of the Rings. Peter Thiel is a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. In Palantir, it allowed Sauron to control all the other Palantirs, so it could control what you did see or didn't see. And this is what we're seeing is basically greater control. So if you're saying the things which the status quo of the day wants to hear, it'll get 100,000 streams. It'll get likes and all sorts of, but if you don't, they will turn the tap off on you. It's that simple. We've seen,
and right now we've got 170 people watching us. Only 170.
Yeah.
It should be far more than that.
I know, and it is just what it is. I'm saying the same situation, going back to the CPA. I had 135,000 people.
Oh, here's a good thing. We've just had another donation. We've just had another donation, another $8.99 New Zealand dollars from W924. Thank you very much, brother.
How are we going to split that down the middle? Hey, no, I'm just kidding. No, thank you very much. Every bit counts. Yeah, I mean, I even had this sort of conversation with you today, Vinny, that, I'm never really been that early. My background is artillery, so for me it's not an issue of how many rounds you put down the range. It's a question of how many of those rounds actually hit the target. And very early on the piece, I've realised that I've never been concerned about whether a large number of people listen to me or not. Obviously, that impacts my livelihood, and this is what they're basically doing is that they're effectively defaming me. And even though they're meant to be the capitalist society, they're not allowing this to be a capitalist environment. They control the printing press lever, and they're deciding who gets heard and who doesn't get heard. I choose to do stuff online, but I also do stuff in print because I know it's the only way for me. I put out a paper that goes into a cafe. I know that they can't turn around and actually switch off that switch and stop people from reading my newspaper. It's my means of actually making sure I get a large audience, because pre-TPPA, I knew that people wanted to hear what I said, because my social media page was going up all the time, and at a mere 1,500 people, I was reaching out to 135,000 people, of which 10% of that weekly, so you're talking about 13,500 people, were reacting to what I said. And that's only at 1,500. If it had been left to its own devices, I'm pretty confident that you'd be now looking at 30,000. And by all the means, I would be having as much clout as any of the mainstream media. But unfortunately, we're not corporate, so we get the fucking kibosh put on us. And only the dominant dogma of that corporate, that fascist system controlled by white old dudes, actually gets to be heard. And the irony is, their biggest champions is this left-wing lambskin that's covering their right-wing white wolf. And that's what they are. They're a wolf in lambskin clothing.
And that's, interestingly enough, the symbol of the Fabian Socialist Club. The wolf in sheep's clothing.
And the member of the Fabian Society included Sir Roger Douglas, who gave a very, very good speech at the Montpellier Society, which was mentioned in the Listener, but you won't be able to find that on the line. The Listener, by the way, is a very popular, used to be a very popular print magazine. And he said the statement he made in that was, don't let the fox see the hound until it's too late. Under Rogernomics, we got a Labour anti-nuclear government that turned around and built the Waihopai spy model. They gave it over $500 million to date. Under the Labour left-wing carrying government, we increased the budget of the New Zealand SAS, so it made up 34% of the New Zealand defence budget. We increased the defence budget from, I think it was about 800 million to about 1% of the GDP. And originally what we'd do is we'd release the figure with the GST tax added on. Progressively, governments have actually released that budget figure, but they've hidden the GST to hide the fact that it's been going up. John Key's government committed $20 billion to defence, which over 10 years, which equates to another 1% of our GDP, plus GST being added to our defence budget, which Jacinda hasn't rescinded. And that defence budget will largely be spent on accommodating NATO-based or UN-based forces in New Zealand and spending money on the US military-industrial complex. Case in point, they're developing a social media hub which will operate out of Hakia, which has been given a $2 billion upgrade as part of this $20 billion spend. That upgrade will be overseen by junior members of the Five Eyes, which is Singapore, known as the Nine Eyes, and those guys who outsource the private, contractors. What they've been known about, when you actually understand the Singaporeans' electronic intelligence apparatus, their goal is not just to protect us from terrorism, but to, quote unquote, create a more harmonious society. They'll do that by controlling who gets seen, who doesn't get seen.
If I may,
engineering.
I want to put this into context for people. China's not technically a communist state anymore, ladies and gentlemen. They're actually now a technocracy where the algorithms and the social credit system control the population, not voters.
That is completely correct, and it's interesting you mention that too, because in Australia they've got a thing called which I'll work it back. We'll go a little bit of history. Thomas Leach, the Dean of Engineering, created a thing called Project SEAL, which was the attempt to create a tsunami bomb, and which was basically going to be the weapon of choice of the Americans hadn't created, the atomic weapon. That weapon was later evolved and developed, and that's another story which ties in things like the Hikurangi Trench. However, after the war, old Mr. Leach was put out to pasture to be in charge of the Snowy Mountain Hydroelectric Dam. Oh, that's a bit of a come down for a major, weapons scientist. Turns out that the Snowy Electric Hydro Dam, which actually is the heart and soul of Australia's water control, is also the heart and soul of Australia's geoengineering research, and it also was the heart and soul of Australia's albeit short-lived attempt to develop their own nuclear weapons. So they actually gave them a major promotion. Well, last year, the Singaporean company turned around and they bought the brains of the Snowy Mountain Hydro scheme off them. That's called, I think, just Snowy Mountain Engineering, and that's the one that does all the research and has all the intelligence and all this, 50 years worth of information. And they thought that was bought up by a Singaporean company who was given $1 trillion investment by China to buy stuff all around as part of their Beltways project. That same Beltway project supports Agenda 2030. So, it's quite amazing, because you talk about a democracy. The whole idea about Agenda 2030 is to get everybody out of what Goldman Sachs calls the New World Order. How's Saudi Arabia going to do it? Well, what they're doing is they've decided that instead of pumping oil out of the ground, they're going to be the world's best and leading developer of second-generation smart weapons technology. And quite frankly, that thought scares the crap out of me.
Hey, Ben, one
They're
second.
doing it under...
1 second. We've just had 3 super chats within a minute of each other. We've had $10 from Johnny Morgan. We've had another $8.99 from W924. And we've had £5 from Alison Batt. And she says, I saw your Christchurch video before your free speech was taken.
Well, as you're saying, so the Saudi Arabians under this Agenda 2030 have come up with this thing called Vision 2030, and their plan is to basically lead Saudi Arabia out of the oil empire by being the world's leading producer of smart weapons technology. Interestingly enough, how it's actually going to work is New Zealand has a thing called Trade 2030, and they're going to turn around and be developing smart technology to combat climate change by creating smart cities. That technology is dual purpose. It can be used to create 5G. It can be used to create all sorts of wonderful smart technology phones. It can also be used to make drones, which are dropped on Muslim people in Yemen. And how they're actually going to do it is they're going to, part of their partners in this is a thing called Pathways 2030, which is where they're going to be turning around and using Pacificist cheap migrant labour, getting them involved in cell phone manufacture, can also be useful for digital manipulation as well as cyber security. They've turned around, and it's this whole thing of 1984. Let's turn around and call war peace. Let's turn around and call ignorance knowledge. Let's call weakness strength. They're literally playing from the 1984 George Orwell playbook.
Guess who?
China,
interestingly
China,
enough,
Coca-Cola, Saudi Arabia. These are our planet savers.
That's right, and it turns out that Aldous Huxley and George Orwell were both members of the Fabian Socialist frickin' Society. So how did they understand the plan?
Well, I mean, this always goes to this issue of notification, that they always notify us before they do something. It's a theory which I actually haven't really spent a lot of time looking into. I've heard people mention all the time. I have to say, they've got a point. It does seem to be this thing where whether it's, the Simpsons and 9/11 or Notre Dame burning, they do seem to have this uncanny habit of telling us about what's going to happen next. And as you said, in some ways, when George Orwell wrote 1984, its original title was actually called 1948. He wasn't writing about the future; he was writing about the present day.
Yeah, that's actually true, and that they just switched the numbers around and turned it into sci-fi.
Yeah.
Now, because then, instead of a warning, it becomes predictive programming, so that later on, when people see this thing coming and see it actually being implemented, they're not quite as shocked as perhaps they would be if it just came out of nowhere.
Well, it's a whole process of decentralization. I mean, it does, as we talk wax lyrically, it does. I do kind of wonder sometimes about what the purpose of this Brenton Tarrant's video actually was, because, on one level, thousands of people actually saw it, but it also gave us a lot of information to actually kind of go, hey, what the hell's going on? Again, Max Egan in the car. And again, that car may have a perfectly innocent explanation, but I haven't seen the mainstream media jumping up to turn around and say this belongs to Mr. Muhammad. And by the way, I'm just saying that because we do associate Muhammad with Muslim, and it actually isn't. It's not a stereotype. It's a general, a whole lot of Islamic people, and I just picked that one, so I'm not attempting to bag anybody. But the point is, if they wanted to shoot that theory down, they could do so very easily by simply. But instead, we got them leading us towards this neo-Nazi movement, suggesting that vehicle, their vans, had the same number plate, which is bullshit. We've had them, the same situation. Look at the situation with the Crusaders. Oh, we're all we one. We should embrace our Muslim brothers. They're not my Muslim brothers. They're my Christchurch brothers. They are my neighbours. I don't care whether they're Jewish, Muslim, or whatever. But yes, we're going to do this, and something like, oh, wait a minute, we're going to have to change the emblem of the local rugby team because it's about Crusaders. Well, many of the Muslim people, and some actually do want it changed, but many have said, no, it's our rugby team, leave it alone. But we were told, oh, no, yes, this has come down upon the Prime Minister's office. Actually, that turned out to be a bit of crap. Same situation with the Anzac, Islam prayer at Anzac. Well, how that came about was RSA offered to the Islamic community, would you like to do a prayer? The Muslim community went, well, you guys sure it's, your kind of your day, is it appropriate? No, it's okay. Only when they've been offered the invitation and taken it up, did suddenly our mainstream media, who was one level's cooing, we all need to be one, suddenly pounce on it under this whole concept of divide and conquer. This entire schizophrenic narrative they've actually had along the way, where they've largely suggested that, it's probably one gunman, but he's connected to a right-wing network at the same time. We can't prove it.
We've just had another super chat in from Sprung Spa. I think that's £2 there, £2 British. Thank you so much, Sprung. That's awesome, bro.
Hey, thanks, guys. And I'm really genuinely, you said we've got an audience of 172 people listening to it. But what generosity on their behalf? I would rather have 172 people that actually give a damn and do something than 100,000 people who just think, oh yeah, that's cool, pass me the popcorn. And I'll tell you what, that actually does really remind me of something. The reason why I became a journalist was when I was 9 years old. I watched John Pilcher's Year Zero, which was on the genocide of Cambodia, and at the end of that documentary, there was a little bit scrolled up at the end, turned around and said, when this originally showed on ITV, over £250,000 was donated without being solicited by mostly housewives to ITV to the people of Cambodia. And, I remember watching it as a kid and going, wow, this guy actually does something that actually, makes people do good things. And, that's pretty much what I've been trying to do today. So, to your 172 people, thank you very much, because you're actually doing something, and that's we've talked a lot about the problems tonight, but caring is part of that solution, and that's what we've got to do, is we've got to basically empower ourselves and get out there and make more people care, and it's not about hundreds and tens of thousands of people, Vinny. It's about not even waking up. It's taking the people that are aware of these issues and getting them to do something, because one person that's actually awake and doing something is a lot more constructive and productive than 10,000 people lying on the floor going, it's not a numbers game.
Yeah. What is it? One person can do really quite amazing things, and a group of people could theoretically do quite amazing things if there was a person directing them, that kind of thing. And what I mean by that is you need to value the individual over the collective. And the reason why you value the individual is because the individual exists and the collective doesn't exist. Okay, and if a collective exists,
I agree.
And if a collective exists, touch it. Can you? No, you can't.
Yeah.
No more than you can touch a forest. You can touch a tree. The tree exists. The tree is real. The individual is indeed the only thing that matters. And when we get into these group think, and when I say group think, I mean the group that doesn't think, they just do what they're told, it is dangerous, because it threatens to basically destroy individuality in and of itself, which is extremely bad for everybody concerned. And we've also got another $2 super chat in here from Low Budget. Thank you so much, man. That's awesome.
Low Budget. Oh, you're awesome, Low Budget. That's cool. No, actually, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like when some of you guys have turned around and done 14, I think. Who's our man providing us our smoke and our beer tonight?
That's Steve Brighouse.
That's it's good on you, Steve. But the £2 ones, they really resonate with me, because that's people going, actually, we don't have a lot to give, but we're giving something, and that's quite humbling. It's. I go back to this issue. I want to do a couple of things. You said a few things which resonate with me, which is, I wrote this thing the other night, and on social media, I turned around and just said, look, my personal belief system, and that's all it is. It's my personal belief system, is that we're kind of like a lung. The universe has been breathing and collapsing. Everything we do now, we're destined to do for the rest of our lives, and you may as well have the best life you can, because we're going to have it over and over again. And that's just my particular belief system. But I also believe that the universe and our world particularly works on the basis of diversity, and we shouldn't be afraid of somebody that is a Muslim. We shouldn't be afraid of someone that's a Christian. We shouldn't even really be afraid of the right winger. I mean, we might think they've displaced them and tell bad taste jokes about them in return, but we need to turn around and start actually appreciating each other's differences, because that's where our future is. And if we don't, what will actually happen is very, very simple. The planet's going to be okay. The human race will be gone in a very, very short time, and the universe won't care. It'll be us that didn't live up to our potential, and we'll be just a speck of sand that got washed off, and we will miss the great adventure, And I think that's personally very, very sad. I don't lie awake at night time and go, I'm going to bring down the new order, and it's this, we must do this. It is what it is, and there is no point getting really bent out of shape about it. But I would like to see the human race grow to its full potential, which I think is going to be quite amazing. But the only way it's going to do it is if we take all these different ideas and we actually embrace them. Mm. So, that's my esoterical, philosophical side of it. And again, the other thing I was just going to say is that, this numbers game, we get obsessed with it. And yet, the single sniper with a 76-cent bit of lead can do more damage than an entire battery of artillery, because it's not about actually how many people listen to you. It's not about how many people actually read your paper. It's actually about the people that do listen, read your paper, what they choose to do with that information. And to me, that's so simple. I'm not trying to turn around and change. There's a good portion of this world that you cannot change their mind, and they're gone. I've accepted that. But there's a number of people out there that, we're going to go for some tough times, man. But
we're talking intellectual triage, more or less. Okay, so there's certain people who are literally not smart enough to get it. Like they will never be. They're actually not actually capable of understanding complex systems or human psychology or anything like that. And I'm not talking about they just don't know it yet. I'm talking about they're actually too dumb to figure it out, even if it were taught to them. That's the situation that we find ourselves in. About maybe 40% of the population fit into that category, and a large percentage of the rest of the population are reasonally intelligent. And I just want to talk for just a minute here, Ben, to get this thought out.
I think most of the time to go for
it. Because here's the problem. You've got brains, more or less, and as John Cleese said, you have to be reasonably intelligent before you can figure out that you're not that bright. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the population are not that bright, and they're not bright enough to see that they're not that bright either. And to quantify that, the United States did a survey of people asking what percentage of they are on the intelligence spectrum. Are you very intelligent? Are you reasonably intelligent? Are you average? Or are you less intelligent than the average? Only 4% of respondents believe that they were less intelligent than the average. Now, this means that the dumber you are, the smarter you think you are. And the smarter you are, the dumber you think you are. Isn't that interesting?
Well, it is, but there's another issue out here too, which I try to bring home to people, and it's like, people get on the internet and they look at stuff. And it's actually 9 times out of 10, the flawed, and God knows I'm guilty of it. So please don't think I'm speaking with a whole halo over my head. But they think they're smart enough to spot dots. The human brains are very, very good at doing this. And they get on the internet and they go, great, I've managed to doing this and I'm going to connect to this up. And they think, this is what it is. But they don't necessarily have all the information, so they can't really, they're missing key bits. And this is the difference. I like to say, look, I'm not good at many things, but I like to think I'm a good researcher. The difference between me and smart people using the internet is I was actually trained to be a researcher. I am told when I get a bit of information, okay, that seems what it is. Now can I go away and test it? What means can I go away and test it? Can I find multiple bits of information, confirm it? And I'm constantly trying to fight the battle with my own ego to say, wait a minute, is this actually the facts, or is this what your dots are joining? Okay, up until this afternoon, I would have said that the timeline was what couldn't be. Once I had one bit of information, I was able to turn around and change my viewpoint. And that's the bit that people need to learn. They need to be able to learn. It's not just, there's a whole generation of people that didn't go to university. They didn't get it's not that they're not smart. They didn't get taught how to research or quantify or discern the information. The next generation of internet and social media, if left alone, I believe, will be able to do this, but it's new technology. The second part of the equation is learning that you've got an idea, okay, that idea can change with new information. And it takes, it's a cliche, it takes a big man to turn around and say, I'm wrong, or my information actually needs to be correct because I now have new data. I know there's going to be people who, for last week, have been really, really supportive of me. They're going to get really angry about what I've said tonight. I'm sorry to those people, but that's the information. Those are the facts. I now have to change my viewpoint on things.
By the way, Ben,
that's the new information.
We've had another 20 Australian dollars this time, contribution from Nizelis1, and they say PewDiePie, Candace Owens and 4chan didn't do anything. Stop labelling a Mongolian basket weaving forum a hate website. And I think this is actually an interesting point that the donors there is making, and by the way, thank you so much for that, is that they now basically have carte blanche to shut down anyone they want for any reason they want. And they wouldn't have been able to do it without this incident.
And they can shut it down, and they can put a label on it, and increasingly in New Zealand, they know that they can take it into court, and the judges will make decisions based upon on laws which are basically unconstitutional, and nobody can challenge them. And it's, I don't go to Pew Pew or 4chan or whatever, so to be honest, I've never even heard about these events. But what I do know is that they were monitoring it beforehand, and so to turn around and say, like, oh, we had no idea, when they've already put a university into lockdown based upon what they saw in 2015, it kind of proves that they're not telling us the full truth. And that, and their response is to have a royal commission where none of us can ask our questions, none of us can turn around and ask for full transparency. We just have to let them control what the confines of that, even like today, Pike River. Guess what? We're not going to Pike River because suddenly it's not safe,
How many times have we heard that exact same frickin' delay tactic? It's like, we're going to legalise cannabis. Really? Are you? Or are you just going to delay it again? Oh, well, it might be dangerous. Really? Has it killed anybody in 10,000 frickin' years?
Well, yeah. And it's like the police association today saying on that issue, saying, oh, well, no, we don't agree with these, law changes and, putting that there. It's like, I'm sorry, you're the police association. Shut the fuck up. It's actually the government who works supposedly for what the people tell them. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. We've got all these different organisations out there that are actually running like their personal kingdoms and can do whatever they want, and, they are accountable to no one.
Ben, we have another super chat in here. $5 Australian from Brisbane AE86. He says he appreciates Ben's ability to speak and Vinny's humour. This crazy time and both your hard work.
Thank you, guys. That's actually really appreciated because, you do, when you're out here, sometimes sort of feel like you're the lone voice in the wilderness. And, I sit there on occasion and I think, why am I doing this? I could go off and I could create a magazine that's just based around rugby and beer and make a lot more fucking money than doing this. I do it because I'm dumb. I do it because I grew up having all these lofty ideas about how our democracies are meant to work and how our open free society is meant to work. And I just find it morally reprehensible when I see all the values which I was brought up with and believed were New Zealand values being flushed down the toilet, and nobody really seems to give a shit. So, it's good to hear people actually appreciating what we're doing, all 172 of us. Yeah. But, and saying that, it's, what our figures are on social media, I know for a fact that, yes, I may only get this many people show up on this page, but those people who share that information and then go out, not just on the internet, but go and have conversations to go to party, they do get that information. And for the last 10 days anyway, it has been a fairly consistent situation where I write a particular bit of information, factually back it actually up, the Christchurch press comes out the next day and responds to it accordingly. So, I'm one little person and I don't have the mega TV3 broadcasting, platform, but the fact that they feel the need to respond to what I'm doing indicates that I'm being an effective operator.
Indeed.
And with the resources I have, that's all I can actually ask for.
Well, I have another announcement for you, Ben. In from Kane Titchener, $50 New Zealand. He says, "Thanks for your work, Vinny and Ben." Thank you, Kane. That's awesome, bro. Love that, man.
Cheers, buddy. That really is amazing. Okay, so let's where are we at the stage? We sum the situation actually up at this stage.
I'm so sorry, Ben, to interrupt.
Yep.
I want your take on Pike River. What actually happened there, and why is it taking so fucking long for them to get back in?
Well, Pike River is, again, not an area of major expertise, but basically, prior to Pike River, they knew they had issues with that particular ventilation shaft. They chose to ignore it. At the time when events started going wrong, Peter Whitnell was writing his CV at the time that he knew it was going wrong because he knew he was going to be needing a new job. They pumped oxygen.
1 second, Ben. We have another $20 in here from Steve Brighouse. He says, "Here's a butter chicken each for lunch with naan." Cheers, Steve. That's
cool,
awesome,
guys.
man. So the ventilation on the mine, sorry.
So they pumped oxygen into once they knew there was an area, they actually pumped oxygen into the mine, which when you've got a fire, it's kind of like pouring liquid onto it. So they there's a very good. If people want to know more about Pike River, I'd steer them towards a document called "Murder at Pike River." It actually also ties in with the Masonic connection, which maybe we'll even have a little bit of a chat about that towards the end of this as well, or after this. But he goes for it really, really, really hard and fast and points out all the errors and mistakes and cover-ups that were done at Pike River. We've had people at Pike River that were ignored by John Key. They turned around and did their own investigation. Labor's jumped on there. Oh, well, don't worry, if you give us information, we'll look after you. And it looks like Labor's now shafting them again, which doesn't surprise me.
Shafting a miner, that's interesting. We have another donation in here, £5 from Sprung Spa. Thank you so much for that, brother.
Thank you, Sprung Spa. So, they pumped this gas or oxygen into the mine. They created this disaster. At the time, there's one thing I've always noticed, and when they wrote I think it was the Royal Commission, it might have been just an inquiry, but they broke it into it was very hard to read. It was almost they deliberately didn't want you to get to know. But what I spotted was that they, at one point, one of the survivors picked up the phone and he rang through to an emergency service, and it got through to an answer phone. Now, at that point, the timeline, a little bit like today, was quite vague, but interesting enough that emergency phone call should have been registered somewhere. It should be on a computer file. That should give us an exact time. It didn't. We had Dean Dunbar, I think it was, whose son died in the thing. He came forth with information where one of the women, her it was either a son or a husband, her phone rang from the mine. That phone was taken from the police and has never been seen. We saw an acknowledgement that the chain of evidence in the Pike River, the police have even done it, but it was a pile of crap. So going into Pike River is very, very important. It's not going to recover the bodies, but it's going to give us information and technology and stuff that's got computer chips that'll give us timestamps and forensic evidence. Now, what have the police done? They finally, yes, we're going to go in. The police wouldn't go in and send a forensic specialist. And by the way, there are forensic mine specialists out there, so it wouldn't have been hard to get hold of one. No, they gave the people that are willing to go in there rudimentary information so they can go and conduct the investigation. Now, they did conduct the investigation, and it got to a murder trial. They've set those people up to fail because they're not experts. Their testimony won't carry that much weight as if the police wouldn't do that. And it's this old boys, white old dude situation that we come up with again. And we talk about, I said with Rogernomics and the Longy government, well, after the Rogernomics, we had the Labour government, and they did the same thing. They gave us, on one thing, things that served our immediate ego and our immediate self-image, verification of left-wing values, but in actual fact and economically, they crushed us. They pushed us further into this neoliberal echo chamber. Now we've got Jacinda, and she's doing exactly the same thing. And you look at it, Helen Clark came from a privileged family from religious backgrounds, blah, blah, blah. Same thing with Jacinda. Her father is a senior was a senior police officer. He was a high commissioner to Niue. He was a high-ranking Mormon Church of First Shul. As a member of that category, as a given that he would have been a member of the Freemason Society as a police officer. And we go, but that's ridiculous. And it's like, why? We all grew up watching Monty Python. We all watched Blackadder. We all watched The New Statesman. We all watched Hot Fuzz. We know that this connection between the old boys and the police is very, very solid. And, of course, we know it's a matter of fact because it's in Jacinda's own Wikipedia file that she went to university on a Freemason scholarship. She ended up working for the UK police. And what was she doing at the time? The UK police had yet another Freemason scandal, just like the P2 affair, and they had to send in people to investigate it. And then all that happened was it was whitewashed, and they used PR people like Jacinda to cover it up. So we've got this whole issue of the white old dudes running the show, and now the white old dudes are going, beware of the white right. Well, yes, I am aware. I am afraid of the white right because you're the ones calling the shots, and it's sure as hell not some low socioeconomic dickhead that drinks too much beer and has a bad taste in fucking clothing running around doing Z-Cole, but other than that, it has no connections. if you want to look for right-wing conspiracies in New Zealand, let's turn around and look at the 20 Soviet aircraft that have landed in New Zealand since the 1990s, and I can give you the names of the New Zealand companies, and I have done so in both my books, that were helping supply arms to UN arms embargo on behalf of Saudi Arabia and other, basically, entities seeking, concessions in return for igniting wars. The entire economy, which is in the hands of 1%, is a right-wing conspiracy. And it's not even a theory, it's an economic historical reality.
Speaking of the economic historical reality, we mentioned Roger Douglas before and the privatisation and of strategic assets and things of that nature ripening us up for dissolution into a new world order. And I think it's a good point now to remind people, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, my most viewed video is not yet Jacinda Ardern exposed in 7 minutes. We need 10,000 more views, and that will then be my most viewed video. At the moment it's some guy about reptilians or some shit. So if somebody would please go and help me just 1 second, Ben. Just 1 second.
Let your readers know who did the research on that.
Yes, that's I was just getting to that. So that was a joint effort between me and Ben. How many days did we stay in this office, Ben? Like maybe 3 days or something like
3 days. And we didn't just pick on Jacinda. We actually picked on all the political parties to show how this neoliberal element had gone throughout the parliament. And for example, we've got the Green Party. You've got James Shaw. James Shaw's own LinkedIn profile has him as a consultant for Bayer Pharmaceuticals, which is the company that owns Monsanto. Both of those companies, by the way, have a hand in the 1080 in terms of they've Monsanto created the patent for 1080. Bayer run the patent for Pacificum, which is going to be the next generation using poison. Both of those companies are sponsors of Agenda 2030. And of course, James Shaw has also got on his LinkedIn profile that he was a consultant to Cadbury's, who is owned by Nestle's, who is yet another sponsor of this Agenda 2030. So, with good old Jacinda, she's not just the only one to blame. This neoliberalism creep, which has gone in and it's taken over all front ranks of our parliament, and virtually every single one of our parliamentary members in the front bench comes from a distinguished family. They have gone to Ivy League universities, either in Oxford University or in the United States. They, in many cases, belong to a UN-affiliated organisation called Parliamentarians for Global Action. It used to be called Parliamentarians for a New World Order. These
Ben,
guys
we have a request.
Have basically...
we have a donation in from Low Budget, $2 New Zealand here. He asks you to elaborate on the Central Auckland US military operations, and we also have another $5 Australian in from Brisbane AE86. He asked, has the MS mainstream media mentioned the strange silver car? So has they mentioned the strange silver car, and can you elaborate on the Central Auckland military operations happening later this month?
The strange silver car, the only time they've made any reference to that is short versions, no, they haven't. They will not deal with that Toyota vehicle directly. The only thing that's come about is during a very extensive chat room feed which discussed the number plate, and it was put out by an anonymous source that number plate tied into a company that's run by a guy called Kevin Arps, who is a known neo-Nazi. That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. The following day after that particular chat feed, that's when they ran this newspaper article. So they'd obviously been following the feed, and they drew lots of bows. But in actual fact, apart from being obnoxious, Kevin Arps has got nothing to do with this attack. But the way that they spun the story, they've made it seem like there is a connection when there is none at all. Going to the exercise, that's the exercise which takes place from around about May the 5th to around about May 22nd. It predominantly involves the US aviation US Army Aviation. They are going to be working with New Zealand and other nation members. It's a counter-terrorism exercise. It's operating around bases for Nuapai, Papakura, which is where the New Zealand SAS are based, someplace in downtown Auckland, and Ahakia. It will be taking place at the same time that there is a drill being carried out by the Coast Guard, which, and I really hate crisis actor things, and I think this is actually almost a plant. But yes, there is an exercise, and they've called upon people who want to be simulation crisis actors, and it will be taking place at the same time which Ramadan is on. So, and I understand there's a couple of other military exercises on the same vein occurring, not just in New Zealand, around the location. So yes, there is a US military exercise taking place.
I've got some details just to add to that.
Yeah.
The operations are from the 8th till the 23rd of May, and guess what happened the last time we had massive terror drills with international participants in New Zealand? All right, you guessed it, the Christchurch Mosque attack.
Well, and before that, what actually happened was Operation Katapo, which was during the Christchurch earthquake. And again, putting on my tinfoil hat, but I'm sorry, I'm a believer of second-generation atomic weaponry, which is electron weaponry, which most people refer to HARP. I could do an entire show on basically how it works, why Rocket Lab is so significant to it. But yes, that's when they had a military exercise. You might also remember, Vinny, we were doing a show just before another significant earthquake occurred in this Hawke's Bay area, which I said, this is where this next earthquake is going to occur. It was called Operation Koru. It took place on November the 5th in Taranaki, which is, and November the 5th is not only Guy Fawkes Day, but more significantly to the Maori people in New Zealand, it's the date of Parihaka when New Zealand forces overran basically a tribe of Maori people that were pacifists and basically took all their land in an outright land grab. So it was an extremely culturally insensitive thing to do, and this is the same area where they're now actually they've opened it up for new mining permits under the Jacinda government, who said they weren't going to do that, just like Operation Katapo also took place in the National Forest area where there's huge mineral resources, and specifically there is a mineral deposit route just behind the back of Pike River. So, wherever they're having these exercises tends to be where there are mineral-rich areas. They're the same areas which are soaked in gang activity and methamphetamine. They've been pouring, and they're all areas which basically are low socioeconomic, actually have a very, very good history of standing up to the government. But basically what they've done is they've smashed these areas, these places so that people are socially are suffering because of the high level of dysfunctional people operating within their communities. They have created a situation where basically there won't, it's going to be very hard for people to protest in those areas because they either are too busy trying to make a living, or it's the only means to make any income is getting the crumbs out of these mining operations, which are all happening contrary to what Jacinda Ardern and the Agenda 2030 is all meant to be about.
Actually, that's not true. Part of the Agenda 21 is resource extraction. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Essentially,
please do.
Essentially, they want to map out every single resource that there is and tap it and prevent anybody else from getting their hands on it, more or less. So it's control of the resources. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like you've got the area that's the Chatham Minings, which also occurs between Wanganui and the west coast, which is central to all of this, and that goes out to the Kiramatic Trench, which is hugely high, and not just nitrates, but all sorts of minerals. They're trying to make that into an eco-park, which is not about eco-park, it's about issue monopolisation. They've done the same thing in Africa. They've got the Transvaal Park, which crosses five different countries in Africa. The indigenous people have been moved out of those areas, have taken complete control of these areas, and they are all areas which are strategically rich in minerals and strategic areas. So this whole save the planet, and it's like the same thing like they're now using New Zealand military under Ron Marks is going to be helping the British army hunt down poachers, which they did in the 1980s, Operation Lock, which wasn't about hunting poachers. It was actually about destabilising the region. So we've just signed up for that. Just like Ron Mark turned around and said, oh, we're going to donate $20 million, which is, fuck all money to fight 1080, because I'm desperate to get the 1080 vote. That 20 million includes the development of drones, which, when you look at the companies involved, are all run by basically military industrial companies. I wish I could remember what his name's Nick. His wife is Barbara Speedy. She runs the Convergent Gallery. Nick is the best friend for James Shaw. He has a whole raft of these companies which are involved in all these green technologies. Their clients are predominantly either oil companies or firms involved with the Pentagon. So you're completely correct that these monopolizations are the areas under the pretext of ecology actually has very little to do with genuine green hippie values.
Yeah, it's basically just a smokescreen so that they can control all humans, all resources, and all animals for all time. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's water privatisation again, because in these areas that while we're all focusing, another protest movement that was being spied upon and actually was making, part of my pun, waves, was the water privatisation, because that really food and water really resonate with people. It was getting big following. People were starting through that, and the work being done in 1080. It was allowing us to punch through the smoke screen of Agenda 2030 and go, guys, A, look at the sponsors, and B, let's actually look at their science, because their science is not good science. Because look at who's paying for it. Suddenly we've got this whole issue about law and order and rifles, and all of these issues which we should be paying attention to are being forgotten about. And now we're after the right-wingers and the extremists. Again, I keep underlining this point. Today, the target is right-wing. Tomorrow, and they define who is a right-winger. Tomorrow it's going to be extremists, and an extremist will be anybody that they say it is. And they'll tell you who it is, because they control the social media platforms. Yeah, that's right. And the question is, who's the most extremist? I'm the extremist, bro. I swear to God, if you're a BMX stuntman, you'll be labelled an extremist. Oh, yeah.
But it's, to me, from my university experience and the Wizard of New Zealand, who enchantment is what he calls it. It's what he basically does is he operated on the theory about, and you do the same thing actually. It's operating on a theory where Mahatma Gandhi turned around and said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they win. So he believed that comedy was a really powerful activism terminology. And when he was at university, he noticed this, what he described as a cultural Marxism of people that were basically, they might have called themselves left-wingers, but what they were was ultimately control freaks. And when I was at university, what I found was the people that got involved in student politics, whether they were left-wing or right-wingers, were basically just, they were all wankers. And they were really, all they wanted to be was the people at the top telling everybody else what to do. And they put on whatever badge will allow them to make them feel that they were special little snowflakes and could get us the opportunity to tell us what to do. We saw during the TPPA that some of the people that were wearing the most left-wing T-shirts were the ones saying, no, the TPA is not a constitutional issue, which luckily the Canadian Indians saw through that one and went, yes, it actually is. But we saw the supposed left-wingers steering us away from the issues that were behind the TPA, steering us away from the fact that Labor, the one that they all wanted us to vote for, was the one that had introduced the TPA to begin with. They steered us away. They said, no, Jacinda's going to get rid of the TPA, we'll vote for her. And I was like, well, you're joking. She's going to do exactly the opposite. No, she won't. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy theorist. Problem with me being a conspiracy theorist, which I absolutely am, Vinny, is that I'm a very good one, and I have an extremely long track record of saying outrageous ideas which these control freaks oppose, only for when the chips have actually done, to being right at the end, because I don't come in with a preconceived, I'm for the left, or I'm for the right, I'm for the Muslims, I'm for the Christians. I just basically try my best to let the facts lead me where they go, and sometimes they lead me in very, very strange places, but ultimately that formula has never failed me.
Yeah, misery comes from deception, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't think that that's true, think about all the misery that the entire country is under right now with a government that has naught but deception to its name.
Absolutely, and as I said, I was talking about that example about what I did an article on the Wizard of New Zealand, and he called it re-enchanting the world. And during this thing, he talks about examples of what he's trying to do. This fun revolution, which is guys like Alexander Duprat, who was a very benevolent form of socialism, who believed that genuine science and genuine arts should never be censored, and that you can't have a proper, not a revolution, but an evolution if you don't give those people total free speech. The other guy that I talked about in this article to kind of provide examples to the Wizard was I talked about the mayor of Bogota. Pardon my pronunciation. He used to basically dress up like a superhero and took to the streets picking up garbage himself, just seeing a good example to citizens, and to give them a bit of laughter, and to focus not on the ideology but on the inherently benevolent nature of human benevolence.
Garbage man! And in fact, we also have Claire Swinney saying, "Here, the enemies of freedom reign." And I want to also get this point out to people, is that I want as many people to watch that Jacinda Ardern watched in 7 minutes as possible, because 10,000 more views, that's my number one video from then on out. Yeah. It's got up to 140,000, Ben. 140,000.
That's pretty amazing, man. I'm going to give Claire Swinney a bit of an apology too, because I wrote an article a while ago, years and years ago, about chemtrails, and we had a bit of a fracas. And, we haven't really spoken since then, but she's done a lot of really, really good work, and she's taken a lot of heat for it. So if you are listening, Claire, I profusely apologise for my little temper tantrum, and thank you for all the good work that you do.
Yeah, I want to thank you too, Claire. Very, very appreciative of it. Oh my goodness, it's been nearly 3 hours. We've got 15 minutes now.
I must admit,
go ahead.
It is also, however, Claire, the article I did for Claire has actually proved to be a bit of a bugbear, because when you go and Google my profile, it always turns up on the front page, and it's like, doesn't matter what I do, the chemtrail, the one piece I did on chemtrails, it's always there, and it's haunting me. So that's what people say. Oh, you believe in chemtrails? Well, you know what? I bloody will do so. And it's not every single cloud in the sky is a chemtrail. But when you go out and you read researchers like Owen Wilkes, and again, I'm doing this thing where I'm giving you guys the tools to go and look for this material yourself. He looked at the fact that basically in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, New Zealand was one great big laboratory for the US military and their interests in basically the upper atmosphere for missile defense and for this stimulation of the electron, what I call atomic weaponry 2.0. There is very, very solid documentation behind it. So a lot of the material that we actually, not all the clouds in the sky are chemtrails, but there is certainly a very, very, very large mountain of documentation showing you that they have been carrying out this research in this area from the 1950s, from Operation Crowflight to the current day, where one of the firms in Australia that is now currently running around openly carrying out geoengineering spraying trails is a company that belongs to the Snowy Mountain Hydroelectric Engineering Company. That's the company that has actually been bought out by the Singaporeans, that is now in the control of the Chinese. So, more and more we see every day, NIWA guys would turn around to us and say, oh, no, there's no such thing as geoengineering, that's all a work of fiction. Yeah. Well, today it's mostly NIWA that's the ones that are running around telling us about what wonderful geoengineering technology they've got out there. And as I said to, I'm trying to remember the guy's name from the US, was from the Te Papa conference in 2010, and I said, well, so all these modelling and ideas, and they've got, presumably someone's done some mathematical modelling on it. Oh, yes. Presumably someone's built some prototypes for this stuff. Oh, yes. Oh, who? And he couldn't tell me the answer. So, he was utilising material that he didn't even know where it came from. It had to have come from somewhere. So, again, it's been interesting being a conspiracy theorist, as Claire will know, because basically time ultimately does vindicate pretty much everything I've touched. So, I wonder when we get to the point when we do them at chemtrails, I wonder what they're going to take off the front page of my Google top 10 list and what they'll put there instead. They'll probably turn around and say, because remember, like at the beginning of the situation, you guys believe it's a hoax, and that was what all those, those university, they think they're left wing, but they're actually just working for the Jacinda Ardern's bosses, the white old dudes. And we're like, well, actually, no, we're not. We're the ones that actually have proved that it's actually the footage is not hoax, and we're actually the ones that are actually going through and actually, working for this factually, because right now we've got on one side a group of people that want to believe that it's CGI hoax material and a whole bunch of other part of this disinformation stuff. We've got another group of people that are trying to believe that it's this all-powerful right-wing conspiracy theory, but they actually haven't given us any information. Remind me who the conspiracy theorists are again, Vinny?
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to make. And by the way, Claire Swinney's put a $10 into my Kiwibank. Thank you for that, Claire. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you, Claire. And so it's going to be interesting. Another aspect of this, in which this again Claire reminds me of, because at one point, that they tried to section Claire because of her extremist viewpoints. And, she went into court and she spoke to the judge. And at that time, we still had judges that weren't complete plonkers. And he turned around and said, "Oh, actually, you've got some very interesting things to say, Claire," and basically gave her a stamp of endorsement, and that was the end of that. But they tried to use the mental health issue, and this has been another situation which is, there's a lot of room out there where there's talk of basically they'd actually like to try and get this guy Brenton Tarrant on mental health issues, because then it means the next step, of course, is if you believe in extremist viewpoints, they can turn around and actually bring you in for mental re-education, just as what they're doing in China. And this is largely what we're actually witnessing. We're witnessing a version of basically the Chinese, we're adapting a version of Chinese democracy. And when I say Chinese democracy, like, we go back to this 1% of the economy. There are 10 major organizations out in the world, and 50% of those organizations basically come from American or US-based banks that relate back to old school European families run by white old dudes, or they relate to Chinese families that specifically relate to a family called the Sung sisters that were the agents for the Dutch East Tea Company in Mumbai. And so basically what we're looking at is that the top 10% controlling our banking group actually do come from the same pool. That's not conspiracy theory. In China, I mean, it's ridiculous. In China, you're not allowed to talk about magic. You're not allowed to talk about time travel. Basically, they tell you what ideas are. Is that really the road we want to go down?
Yeah, definitely not.
I would rather have a few noisy plonkers going around saying things that I find distasteful than basically a whole bunch of people saying we are only allowed to think this. That's a really, really scary idea.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just to put that into encapsulation for you, you have two choices. Number one, you have to put up with crazy people and stupid people. Or number two,
that would be me.
Or number two, you have to put up with ruthless criminal sociopathic scumbaggery that controls every element of your fucking life. And I think the option one's better. Now, we have a question in here from Claire. She says, how did you find out that Ardern was involved with covering up for pedophile police, please?
I'm not quite sure what Claire's alluding to, but what I'm basically, actually, no, I think I do. When we did that original piece on Jacinda Ardern, just much like Obama and much like a lot of these other politicians.
Oh, the Freemason pedophile police. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we did at that time was, on her own Wikipedia profile, we pointed out the fact that what it said initially before Labor took the link down. We said, hey, wait a minute. And they took it down after our little spiel, by the way. We turned around and said, Jacinda Ardern actually was a senior researcher for Tony Blair. And then they just turned around and said, oh, no, she was just a researcher. That's not what she originally said on the actual Wikipedia profile. It also very clearly said that what she actually did was she worked for an organisation called Better Legislation UK.
It's actually, just to correct you, the Better Business Bureau UK.
Thank you. Okay, so what they were basically doing was they were forming these Quago partnerships with the British government, where basically it worked like this. The corporations got to use the British government's resources, and they, the corporations, got to keep the profits. And at the same time, all the legislation, which was under the guys being, compliant with the European Union, what it actually did was it actually largely killed small businesses, or was basically one more millstone. So it was one more creating this fascist model where only the corporates that work in conjunction with the power elite were allowed to make a dollar. Everybody else had to shut the fuck up and do what they're doing. And again, this alludes, and after, it was either before or after her next job was actually working for the British police, and that was again doing PR, and that was at the time when police were undergoing, I think, their third Masonic, which again, that was all in the mainstream press. So everything we put actually out there, we pretty much were able to source, and we drew from the public available material until after the election, when they started taking links down, because that's the other thing that they're doing out there, or basically wiping stuff off the internet. But the footnoting is still there. And I'll raise you another point on that, which reminds me on that. When I came down to Christchurch, I passed through Wellington, and my intention was to go off and use, like I did during 9/11, which was to go to the main library there, which collects all the main newspapers of around the world, the Spiegel, New York Times. And what I planned to do was basically look really hard for all the major pages and collect all the information data I can and screen save it, so that I could then cross-reference what was being said in the paper, because now more and more what you see is they put something up on paper, and then if they get caught out telling a lie, or they want to change the narrative, they can do so. For example, for ages they were telling us that the 1080 activists were trying to threatening to put 1080 into baby formula. That was in at least 3 mainstream newspapers, and I got visited
by the cops after that happened. We've just got another £5 donated to the super chat by Skip Thornhooter. Thank you very much, Skip. That's awesome, bro.
Thank you, Skip. So what I did there was I went to check in the different newspapers and because I can say about the 1080 thing was that what they did was they said, it's the 1080 guys threatened to put 1080 into baby formula. That was actually a pesticide manufacturer, a guy called Jeremy Kerr, who also made illicit drugs and actually had connections to the Czechoslovakian associate of Hell's Angel that got kicked out and had Jacinda Ardern's number. Jacinda Ardern's number was in his partner's phone. That regardless, I did a media complaints thing, and I basically said, well, okay, guys, I take this, I'm not allowed to sue you. Doesn't mean other people can't. They did a retraction, and they took that off the story, but they didn't mention the fact that they'd actually corrected their story. So one of my methodologies was to go into the libraries, collect the hard copy papers, and that way they couldn't turn around and actually say, oh, no, we never said that later on. The problem I actually found was that the library, the main central library in Wellington, which is considered to be the secondly most sound engineering building in Wellington, was closed because of earthquake damaging. Just like they've closed the museums and art galleries in South and around throughout the country, you'll notice that museums and art galleries are getting shut down all the time because of earthquake damaging. And just like how they turn around and they shut down the Fine Arts Museum in Auckland, which is the best fine arts collection in Australasia, on Radio New Zealand they originally announced that they planned to burn 10,000 books. When there was outrage on that particular issue, they came back and said, oh no, we're not going to burn them, we're going to put them through the shredder. And then when students actually protested about it, that protest made the TV news, but they forgot to tell the public what the students were actually protesting about. So my point being is that what we were actually seeing was we saw just before the March, this particular shooting, just like we did in 9/11, I'll come back to that in a second, they actually purged the libraries, the main libraries, so that you couldn't get hard copies to actually make sure you had a documentation of what was said on the day. During 9/11, what I did was a week after 9/11, I was in Wellington. I went down to the library to get out all the US newspapers to cross-reference them and take all the material for the same purpose. All the US papers had vanished. And I said to the librarian, I said, well, you just had this major terrorist attack. These papers are really needed now. People will, oh no, I'm sorry, we get those papers supplied to us by the US Embassy, and the US Embassy's decided no longer to provide them to us. I was in Wellington for about 6 months until I left. There were no American papers after the biggest geopolitical event of the century. in our major capital cities, major library at all. Not one, because they were taken out and got rid of.
Wow, man. That's freaking crazy.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, here's the thing. I just want to make this point as well. Imagine on 9/11, ladies and gentlemen, if they threatened you with 14 years jail for watching the video of the towers coming down.
Yeah. And the thing is that really, like, it's a tricky one because 9/11 we didn't actually see anybody actually die. So, I mean, but we knew, that was the thing. We didn't need to see the bodies. When we saw what happened in the mosque, I've seen it before they outlawed it. I've seen the clips that have been available. I've had people basically looking at it. I've got collected off mainstream. So they want to take me to court, then they better take the papers together. I've collected a full from basically, 40 minutes to 57 still frame of what went down just based on what I can collect off the internet, which gives me pretty graphic details. I'm kind of very, very glad that is low resolution because I have no desire to watch this. But in the interest of public good, if I was to be taken into court, I'm pretty damn certain I would make a circus of it and I would give them a run for their money. This is why they didn't come after me. This is why they didn't turn around and come after the Christchurch Press journalist. And don't really let's forget about the Russian guy. We haven't talked about him yet.
Oh, yeah, let's get on to that after you finish this point.
Okay, so basically they didn't come after anybody that had the means to defend themselves. They went after people that were going to reinforce their propaganda message and that couldn't actually defend themselves. Now, one of the people that was involved in that was Max, Russian names. It's the Porosky. I'll be putting out, after the show gets out, I'll be putting out my YouTube interview with one of Max's friends or sources on my page, my own personal social media page, Ben Vidgen. So you can go and watch the whole thing, and I'll put a couple of little short details there. But what actually happened was the police, after March 15th, had reports of this terrible social media person who looked like he was dressed as a neo-Nazi person, and they immediately went after this. They went after this particular they looked at who his father was, and he'd had a few run-ins with the police because he was a former soldier and suffered from post-trauma, and admittedly he was a bit of a quirky character, I'll give them that, and they cornered him in a street. Now, he ended up dying, and we'll come back to that in a second as well, but in the meantime, they took his son, who, like me and large chunks of Christchurch, New Zealand, and the world, had downloaded the video, and they placed him in custody without bail. And that and owning a cat pistol have been the only things that they got Max, Troy's, the Russian guy's son on. And as far as I'm aware of, up until about a week ago, which is the last time I had a chance to speak to Max's friend source, he is still in jail, in custody. He's a 16-year-old person. He should be protected by law as a minor. They've released the 18-year-old person, and the way they've run the story is they've quite deliberately mixed up the fact that they've got two people there, a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. They said, oh, yes, we'll release the 18-year-old after this Christchurch Press turned around and said, well, you know what, I've got the manifesto too, come and arrest me, this is ridiculous. The police caved in, they released the 18-year-old, but they've actually held on to the 16-year-old who has no political affiliations. His only crime is, like most teenagers, downloading dumb things. In fact, that's not even teenagers, we all do dumb things. And this guy is now still in custody, and after his father is dead, and they let him out for the trial, but otherwise he hasn't had any contact with his mother, who's now also having to go through the grieving process. It's been totally inhumane, totally draconian, and totally unconstitutional, and not one single paper in this country has come to the 16-year-old kid's actual aid. Now,
that's something I wanted to come to this kid's aid. I just don't know his name or how to contact him or anything.
Yeah, well, we can do an entire show on him. Like, give me a bit of time just to go back and make sure my facts are. But
sure.
The thing is, they also turned around and ran the story out that these people were tied up with airsoft and that they all wore Nazi uniforms. Okay, the airsoft sport, involves upstanding members of the New Zealand Defence Society and people from all sorts of walks who aren't particularly political. It's a mainstream sport with mainstream sponsorship. They wear these uniforms for reenactment purposes. They've been invited to be part of the Wanaka over air show, so again, not perceived as being particularly threatening up until now. That's what the uniform that the people who reported it, because they saw it on Facebook and reported it to the police, saw. So that's what the sport was. Now, all the stuff about the sport being a hotbed of Nazis, what they don't tell you is that the person that's their source, and again, I'll get I think in my video, if not, I'll get that person's name, is actually a business owner was a business associate of the person who runs the airsoft. He ceased being a member of that sport when then they themselves had to call the police armed defenders and get him off the premises, and basically pay him out to go away. So the police's source is a person with a criminal record for misuse of firearms who has an axe to grind. That's the person that the police have been using to feed the media with about this neo-Nazi connections to the sport. Okay? A total fabrication beat-up. Second aspect of it is that I've actually got witnesses who have actually also given me a little bit of statement and given me permission to name their names. Includes Kane Williams, who's a jeweller. They actually were living right across the road or behind the park where Troy drove into being followed by the police. What they say is that before there was a loud explosion, which the police say there were no bullets fired, they only used tear gas, and that he stabbed himself with a knife. What they don't tell you was they actually used the robot to smash the window in and put a concussion grenade, which is something you just do not do in a confined space. And afterwards, for 10 minutes, people could hear Troy going, "Help me, help me, help me, help me." Only when it went very, very silent did the police act. Then they found a knife and he had supposedly killed himself. So that's the story that they don't particularly want people to focus on, because it kind of shows that they got 2 + 2 and they got 5. And as a result, a person is now dead as a result of armed police. Same situation, not too far from that area, about a week before the maybe 10 days before the March 15th event, there was a criminal investigation case where police shots were exchanged, police fired back. They panicked. Their rounds went wide and ended up in several people's civilian houses around the area. So as I've said beforehand, I have no problems with the police having specialist armed defenders units that have a very, very good reputation. And by the way, were the people that actually detained the terrorists on the day. I have a huge problem with police officers, of which over half of them are not sworn police officers and have very questionable training, carrying large fucking cannons and handguns when they are not trained to. Furthermore, as we're seeing, it's actually causing an arms race, which is actually now causing gangs to actually desire weapons and actually seek them out.
I just want to actually give the listeners a little bit of a tip here. If you've donated before, ladies and gentlemen, on the homepage of thevinnyeastwoodshow.com, you can go down and it asks if you're a donor. If so, click here for your rewards. Go there. Now, there's a playlist on there. On that playlist, this is an unlisted, donors-only playlist, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there is a 2.5 hour, I think, interview with a police constable, and we go through his entire training process, and it's shocking, ladies and gentlemen. It's shocking how undertrained our police are, and it suddenly explained to me why they're so dangerous.
If you actually read my first book, which was the best-selling book that I told you that had 15,000 copies and isn't mentioned on the internet and never got any newspaper reviews, but which is actually the one that mentions David Tipple, the guy that supplied the arms to the shooter to begin with, along with also the one that pointed out the fact that we're going to see basically gangs having more and more access to weapons, and the police are pretending that they don't actually have these weapons when they do and are doing nothing about it. The opening paragraph introducing to that book, State Secrets 1, is me talking about a police officer actually accidentally letting off his pistol in an onboard plane, plane on an international flight, and as a result, only it missed going through the hole and decommissioning the cargo, ripping that plane out and crashing into downtown Auckland by basically about an inch. So there are lots of stories out there, and I'm guessing you're going to see a lot more of police officers actually, letting off weapons in their own locker rooms because they don't have the same they have nowhere the same training or rules of engagement that I was given when I was in the army. And
can I define that?
It's not only that.
I just want to actually get that as well down to people as well. If you get a gun and stuff like that and you're trained to shoot it or whatever, that's not during a moving target. That's not during a combat situation. That's not when your blood's going frickin' crazy. And that's why they train the military guys so hard on that, to drill it out of them, that the panic that happens to a human being whenever combat happens.
Well, pretty much was the case, and then you also have another issue there, which is, admittedly at the moment, the rifles that the police that we've been seeing carrying around at the moment are on loan from the New Zealand Army. They are very, very, very powerful weapons, and they are totally unsuitable for using in an urban environment. And I've been walking backwards and forwards over the last few days, and I've been seeing police officers, which I doubt, if they're 5 feet tall, I would be impressed, wearing, wet weather gear, which actually goes over their eyes, and to the point that their jackets are actually, too big for them, carrying these massive guns, which they can barely actually lift. I wouldn't trust any of a person with that training with that weapon. And what's more, the circumstances of those weapons being able to be a person. I think, again, another 80% figure. I think it's like 80% of people who have weapons in their own homes, that's what the burglars end up using their own weapons. And I think you're going to see this again is what's going to occur. You're going to see a lot of police officers, because of poor training, actually being on the end of their own weapons. It is not. It hasn't. I mean, it's a question we said again and again. We talked to the Mosque survivors and so on. Said, do you really like the idea of living in a society, many of these people coming from war-torn zones or undemocratic societies, which is what New Zealand? And their response was no. It doesn't make us safer, and it doesn't. And in fact, I'll give you another example. All it does is it adds to the trauma. And this again goes, huge event going on. Trauma. We all got to be sensitive, and I don't agree with that. Suddenly, we've got this thing happened the other day down the road. We've got to have a specialist police unit, and you can't fly over, oh my God, and the bomb square, and when there's live reporting live, it was over in an hour, and it certainly takes a lot longer than an hour to defuse a bomb. And when I turned around and actually went knowing the area and canvassed the area, sure enough, this wasn't actually the device, which I probably will turn out to be something like a pipe bomb and a few rounds, actually wasn't the property of a terrorist. It belonged to gang members that were across the road, but they turned around and reintroduced this whole drama, and they sold it to the world to re-traumatise us and keep us in a state of fear porn.
Yeah, and I think that was actually a point that I brought up with the president of the mosque as well, is that if you've got people with guns outside your mosque the whole time, even if they are police, that's still subconsciously going to traumatise you, like things aren't back to normal, things aren't really safe anymore, that kind of thing. I just don't think it's a good idea.
Well, one of the hardest things I've found about being in Christchurch is where I've been, and again, it's not New York, but every basically 20 minutes where I'm talking to you from now, Vinny, you will. In fact, I'm quite surprised. Always proves the exception. I'm surprised we haven't heard a siren in the background tonight, because normally I'm hearing police sirens all the time, and it puts you on edge. And when you're looking at the circumstances of when they're using them, it's really not that necessary. The vast majority of the sirens you'll hear in this area is the police going after boy racers. And yet it's like that whole thing about, we've got we're meant to respect the Maori culture and remember the history of Parihaka. So what do? We turn around on the 5th of November, the anniversary date of the most heinous massacre of the Maori people, and we turn around and we bring tanks up their main streets. If that isn't psychological warfare, I don't know what is.
That's another thing as well. What's happening to the public and what the physical grief that I felt while I was down there in Christchurch and I brought back with me to Auckland. That's huge, and I do want to make this point as well, that those who are saying it's a hoax and are just repeating themselves and not actually illustrating the evidence, not actually backing up the evidence and things of that nature, think about this for a second. Imagine you were down there, one of your family members got shot to death in one of these things and you had to bury them, and then you go online and you see that a whole bunch of people are saying that you didn't see what you thought you saw, that what happened to you didn't actually happen to you, that you're a liar, that you're an agent, that you're a crisis actor and things like that. And you're in this state of grief and trauma in the first place. What's going to happen to you, right? So have some compassion and some respect, ladies and gentlemen. Just some common human decency is all I ask.
And the thing is, Vinny, is that, okay, look, we're dealing with some pretty dark monsters, and I'll call them that. They are monsters out there, and they know every single dark magic trick in the book. You know, have they ever used crisis actors? They may very well have. But the issue which I'm talking about here is that, in my case, I've given you names, your listeners and my readers, the names of people that I've spoken to. They can actually go and find out themselves whether those people really, really exist. They can go independently of me. They can go to the Mosque survivor stories. It's not that hard to actually go out and check whether or not those people exist. So for anybody that having been given the tools of how they can verify that particular bit of information, that chooses not to, I'm sorry, but you're being a narcissist. Having been given the tools to actually establish it, what you've done is you've latched onto a belief system, and you know you're smarter than everybody else, and everyone else must be wrong because you're right. Well, you're just an idiot. The same is true with the issue of the CGI claim about the video. Okay, I'll admit, David Small, and good credit to him, held me up. I turned around and said, fuck, what is this shit? Isn't it, it's a hoax. Once I realised, and maybe, the lesson is because it happened in my own town, I was more sensitive than I may have been elsewhere, but once I realised that I was dealing with real people, I made it my business to find out about that video, to find out whether or not I could authenticate it or not. Having found out about what it was shot on, I then turned around and found the technical methodologies and reviews to tell you about what happens when you shoot with that video and it goes out of focus. Okay? Anybody else out there that's saying it's a hoax, it's CGI, they could do the same. If they choose not to do it, then I'm sorry, don't hold that on me. What you're doing is you're believing in boogie-woogie monsters because you get your little jollies out of it because you like fair porn. You're not interested in the truth. You just want entertainment. It's the same with Max Egan. Max Egan, I think it's Max Egan, if not, we've turned around and said, look, guys, low resolution. If you run it for a resolution filter, you can do this. Guess what? Yes, you can find the gore, the splash on the walls. Yes, you can find it. Don't believe us. Fine. Do it yourself. We've given you the tools how to go and check and verify that information. And if you don't do it, then you're not being honest. You're not being honest with other people, and you're not being honest with yourself. And guess what? That's how cognitive dissonance works.
I wonder as well, this concept that we've got going on in New Zealand, when people are arguing over the video, my greatest concern is that they're not arguing about the internet censorship, the weakening of national sovereignty, and the taking of defensive weapons off of innocent people.
Well, it goes right back to going to the 9/11 issue, Vinny, because we turn around and we spent a lot of time, a lot of people spend a lot of time going, it's an inside job. And again, to be fair, that work was work that needed to be done. I'm not taking it away from people, but ultimately at the end of the day, what's the reality of 9/11? The reality of 9/11 is that civil liberties got kicked to the curb, and the military-industrial complex suddenly got to have a whole lot more power and a much bigger budget. And those ultimately, at the end of the day, were the real core issues that we needed to discuss. Here in New Zealand, the issue is censorship. It is the issue of extended judicial power of the police. It is the issue of extended power of arming to the police. It is the issue of extended judicial power It is the issue of accountability. These are all very serious issues which we need to address, because this event, whether it was carried out by Brent and Tarrant working for somebody else or they simply exploited it, it's been done so for a reason, because something even nasty is going to come about, and they need this to happen. They need us to switch off and start talking about the important issues, the TPPA, the 1080, the water privatisation, the fact that Agenda 2030 is a corporate-sponsored form of fascism.
Yeah. Now, here's another thing. People don't understand what fascism is. Okay, so it's collectivism, more or less. What's socialism? It's collectivism. What was the Nazi Party? The National Socialist Party. So what do all of these people not care about? Individual rights and liberties. What's the entire reason why the human race has been able to claw itself out of despotism and scumbaggery in order to achieve something great for the individual? Giving people individual liberties. I think that we have a winner, ladies and gentlemen. Let's stop these people taking our rights, But how do you do that?
Straight.
How do you do that?
Well, to me, the issue has always been that I don't hide in the shadows. I stand out and I shout loudly and clearly and da-da-da-da. I believe that's been my biggest protection, and I have no illusion. I think there's going to come a day where once they've picked up all the people that are deemed to be the established voices of opposition, they're going to start coming for the extremists, which will be me. I mean, as I said, we've already had it. You got, before we even got down here, you had the police knocking on your door 5 times, and they didn't actually have any real purpose. They've already knocked on your doors over the 1080.
Just to correct you, just to keep the facts here, 4 times in 4 days. Then they rang me the night ringing down to Christchurch, asking me what time my flight was. And then the week after I arrived home on the Friday, they sent another bunch round. So in total, that's kind of like, as far as I'm concerned, it's sort of like 6 police visits if you include the phone call.
Yeah, it is. It's and I said, we've got this thing of Sam Shear turning around and saying, do you think you guys on the list? It's like, I don't care whether I'm on the list. All I care about is the fact that nobody is, it's terrible, this leaker, this shouldn't be allowed. It's like, can we get to the issue of the fact that the police have turned around and put people on the list whose only crime is they're critical of police action? That's not the behaviour of a healthy democracy. And having judges decide who can cover what and what they must do, it's like, again, it goes back to this issue of David King versus the Crown over Kim.com, where the judge decided what a journalist was. I'm sorry, it's not your place to do that. The reason why we have checks and balances is to stop excessive power ending up in the hands of few, and yet these few people feel that they've got the right to speak for all of us, and so they're kicking our rights to the curb.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And
well, I want to also give people a reminder as well that the Who Are You Really Voting For series, where me and Ben break down every party in this country that has a even slight chance of getting into power, it's freaking extraordinary. They're all dirty as shit.
Grim. All of them, same people when people turn around and thought Winston Peters was going to turn around and, stop 1080 and stop the TPPA. So why in the hell would you think that? This is the man that had Ross Morant, who's got an extremely notorious history, working for him as his research into fisheries corruptions, while Ross Morant was in partnership with one of the parties under investigation, working out of their offices, who turned around and picked up thousands of dollars and delivered them to Ross Morant's, to Winston Peters at Extra Fund. I'm not making this all up. It was in the news. We forgot. This is the man that has regularly been associated with Peter Telleries of the fisheries industry, who doesn't have a very good reputation. Why we thought this man was the champion of the working class, I have no idea. People who thought that were being deluded. Just like they thought that Jacinda, with all of her background and CV, which nobody bothered to go and look at, we just accepted the Labour Party press release about what a wonderful, lovely person, smiley person Jacinda is. Let's do it. And we did it. We made plonkers of ourselves. We went for the Green Party, a Green Party whose leader is a paid consultant to the company that owns Monsanto and Nestle's. Sorry, a company that is owned by Nestle's. This man does not actually have very good green credentials. He does have very good green credentials, and they're toxic green.
They're toxic waste green, and I think that's actually the party in itself. It's the Toxic Waste Green Party.
And I'll give you another example too. Was that over Waihopai, I scored a fucking fantastic goal there. Was that during the Waihopai protests, they set it up like they do, and all these protest movements, just like they did with the TPPA, the political parties turn up and they took control of who was going to speak and what order they were going to actually speak, and they made sure that their political people got to speak first. And when you're in Waihopa and it's a hot sun, it's like that's actually quite a big deal. And they talked about the fact that Waihopa was a listening station. And I literally bowled in there with our SUV. We walked straight in there and we turned around and said, number one, that's a pile of shit, because it's actually not just an actual listening station. It's part of the targeting system. And why are you guys only talking about Waihopa, making it like this is the only spy base? You're not talking about Rocket Lab. And we basically, what we did was, and then they basically wouldn't let us speak, and the media turned around and they were trying to make us into. Ultimately, and then their last thing was, okay, we're not going to let us speak. We dragged out our own bull horns, and we had a protest against the protest. And by the end of the protest, there wasn't anybody in the general public concern that didn't think that I was making valid points, and they all crossed over. During the TPA, they wouldn't let me speak during the TPA. The Labor people, no, we're only meant to have 12 minutes. Over much cajoling and pushing, I got 3 minutes. And that's when I managed to point out to 3,500 people. I said, you do realise it was Labor that actually brought in the TPA, and everybody in the room, and the 3,500 people went, really? I said, yeah. And I said, what's Labor doing at this TPA protest? Because they actually still are supporting it. And that's when some of the non-politically affiliated students took it upon themselves to put out a picket outside Claire Curran's office, which is when Labor turned around and said, we're going to be walking away from the TPA, and all the MPs walked down the main street, TPA, no way, And what did they turn around and do as soon as they got elected? They fucked us.
Yeah.
Like we should have known if we had actually bothered to do our research and actually look at these people's credentials.
Honestly, it's like...
if we don't vote for Labor, we'll get National. We'll vote for the left and get one kick in the eye, or vote for the right and get it's still a kick in the eye.
If you sit there for 15 minutes while somebody pours lubricant over your asshole, you shouldn't be surprised that they wind up fucking you. All right? That's what these people do. They just they tell you what you want to hear, okay? And that's another thing. This is how you can tell if a politician is honest or not. Is what they're saying what you want to hear? A great politician is somebody who tells you you've got to take responsibility. There are no more excuses. You have to do something. I'm not going to be able to solve these problems for you. You've got to be responsible, folks.
There's one thing I'd like your listeners, and I don't know how many are listening at this stage, but if there's one thing that I'd like all of you guys to tune around and do, and think, like, out of nothing else I say tonight, think about this long and hard. Every single protest I've been to, up until the 1080, which is after all this stuff, has been the same. We get there, the so-called opposition party are at the front with their placards, and they speak first. We really need to change that culture, so at the very least, we make it clear that when a politician wants to participate in the vote because they think they're going to get some, in a protest because they think there's some votes to be had out of it, that they sit at the back of the queue. They do not speak first until everybody else who feels the need to want to say something has had their say, because this actually is meant to be their job. They are meant to be listening to us. We're not meant to stand and sit underneath them and hear what they're going to do and elect them, because that's not their job. Their job is to do what we tell them. And that's, out of all the 172 people that are listening here, when you go to wherever you protest, if you turn around and you make sure that you talk to all your friends that are involved in whatever protest movement, that this is the way that protests have to be run in the future, this is you taking back the power and not asking someone else to, we'll place authority on them because they seem to know what they're doing. And that's the issue. Stop waiting for people to come and save you. In France, the Yellow Vest movement, The reason why they wear a yellow vest is because they don't want to be seen as belonging to one ideology, class, or race. The one thing in France, because of all the compliance which we're now having to face as well, lots of people who work working class jobs have to wear a yellow visa out of safe and healthy. That yellow visa, which marks them as the working slave class, is the thing that also marks them common. And everybody that's been involved in the yellow vest movement till now, and God may it continue to be, or the gods may it continue to be so, actually they have been controlling the particular protest movement, not other political parties. And that is our saving grace. When we with capital W, capital E, take back our power and stop expecting other people to save us.
Yeah, and in fact the Yellow Vest New Zealand movement is starting to kick off a little bit, and the organisers have contacted me, but they're a little bit paranoid about coming on the show because they're afraid they might get targeted, as perhaps they should be afraid of getting targeted.
If that's their attitude, then they are an ineffective, useless organisation, and they will get nowhere, because the only way that anybody will actually deal with these people is by standing up in the sunlight. These scum do not like the sunlight. They do not like attention being put on them, and that is our best protection. That's how you kill vampires.
With the light and with silver, which is interestingly antimicrobial. Now, I want to make another statement here, because the reason why people believe in vampires and werewolves and all these mythical creatures is because ancient peoples, ignorant of psychology, ignorant of spirituality, saw horrific things committed by other human beings. And instead of believing that each and every one of us could potentially be inhuman and evil and be co-opted to do horrific things to their fellow man, they chose to believe that no, this was a beast, this was a demon, this wasn't possible, this wasn't possibly an ordinary human being. Understand something, ladies and gentlemen, understand the most horrible realization I've ever had in my life. If you think that in Nazi Germany, you'd be that guy folding his arms while everybody else gives the salute, you won't be that guy. That is the horrible thing that we need to understand, ladies and gentlemen. We are all susceptible for getting on a bandwagon and being part of a goddamn evil system. Because
I learned that and saw that in the army firsthand, Vinny. You know, I mean, I saw people that were on training exercises that were civilian volunteers get beat up because in the moment of the spur, the mob took over, and things that just should not have ever taken place did. You know, and it worries me because, again, you know, I mean, you know, I've been picked up by people after this 9/11. I do a lot of hitchhiking, and people that are national voters at once upon a time, you know, would be like, oh yeah, I've got my gun. And what was coming out of their mouths was so out of character for my experience, but they were afraid. So suddenly they were willing to go along with the rest of the herd if it meant that they weren't feeling like they were at risk. And you know, the monster is us. You know, at the end of the day, all this stuff actually turns around and takes place, not because Jacinda Ardern, not because of the white old dudes. It's because we as individuals choose not to believe in our own power and actually take a stand. And we are all guilty of cognitive dissonance, of having values which actually we believe we're this when our behaviour shows that we are the opposite. But it's whether you consciously just go along with it or you actually actively, like exercise, works to challenge that cognitive dissonance so that you are seeing the world for what it actually is.
Yeah.
You know, right. I look at this yellow vest thing, and I believe I was speaking to an Italian guy a while ago, and he said, look, the yellow vest works in France because, unlike Italy, the people in France, you know, they recognise that they come from many cultural diverse backgrounds, and there isn't an issue whether you're a French Algerian or whatever. It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, the French government and the gendarmes have done terrible things to colonies, but in France, there is a unity that comes out of basically a recognition of a mixed cultural heritage. This is what they're going to attempt to do, is to divide and conquer them so that all the things which are coming to the commonness is removed, and that people are just in different tribes so they can be easily manipulated. This is what magazines like Charlie Hebdo were trying to get through to us. This is why when I turn around I hear people go, oh my God, the Muslims are coming for us. It's like, oh, for please sake, the Muslims aren't coming for us. What you've got coming for us is we've got very powerful people who are able to manipulate the angry, and mostly, first and most foremost, the afraid and the desperate, and convince them that that person across the street's got more indifference than you. When the reality is, we all have 42 chromosomes, and we all bleed when you cut us, and we cry when you say hurtful things, to paraphrase Shakespeare loosely.
I think also it's important to recognise that this concept of false flag terrorism is not a new one. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been going on for a long time, ever since the Romans used to use this tactic. Yeah. So here's the thing. For the first time in human history, we have the technology to spread the information so that, theoretically, this whole game plan, which keeps getting used over and over and over again, I keep getting deja vu every year, Ben, with these attacks, we have the ability to actually inform the entire populace about this Hegelian dialectic and false flag terrorism and that kind of thing, so that, theoretically, it might not actually be able to be pulled off again. All right, wouldn't that be a great future if the government wasn't able to pull off terrorism attacks?
It's a step in the right direction, but it's not the be-all and end-all, because we've also got to realise that these monsters are smart and they learn. And if you remember when I first came on your show, I think it was about 2000 or after the Christchurch earthquakes, and I talked about the fact that one of the symptoms of electron weaponry was when it detonates, you were getting a series of fireballs and sonic booms that were taking place before the events occurred. Well, since it's happened, Vinny, you will never find those words sonic boom. It used to be one of the things I'd go looking for as a keyword for stories. It's not there anymore. It's actually filtered out. They learned to what we had picked up on, and they adapted to that accordingly. So you've got to constantly be ever evolving to match up with what they're doing. And sometimes they will lure us into a false sense of confidence. So we think, oh, this is what's going on. When in actual fact, no, actually it's not. Sometimes a spade is a spade.
Yes, it is. Okay. Oh my God, I'm so tired, Ben, and I've got a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning. So let's see if we can wrap it up with a neat little bow, eh? Go for your life.
Well, okay, so the neat little bow we've concluded today is that the timeline that the police have actually put out, having turned around and spoken to witnesses, which I've named early on the show, they've corroborated that. They've been able to show the CCTV footage to corroborate. The issue is the time in Tarrant's video is out. So that recalibrates everything and basically means the timeline as it stands at the moment seems fundamentally correct. We know that the video wasn't subject to a hoax. A lot of what we're seeing is a result of basically low-level resolution. We know that there is only one single gunman the whole way through, the same car, the same gunman. We don't know who that person actually is. And I'm not trying to create a new conspiracy theory, but the real is Brent Tarrant disappeared into Pakistan, and that's the last time anyone who actually knew him actually can confirm who we have as the guy in the cell. That's all we have got at this stage. We know that there were actually on the day of the event that there were at least 6 people arrested, not 5. That can be verified. We know that we still have a silver Toyota out the front that was drove right towards Tarrant, that he pointed his weapon at and did not fire at. We know what the number plate of that vehicle is. We still do not know who owns that vehicle. We know that there was a gentleman in red. We don't know anything more about him, but he does exist. We know that there have been lots of events that are so politically convenient that have been set up in motion before this, and quite often sometime well beforehand, so that if Brenton Tarrant acted solely without any other funding, we accept the official narrative, they have certainly politically exploited that opportunity. We don't know where he got his money from. There has been no authentication to say where his money is. We don't know whether he has any links to a right-wing organisation because, again, there has been no actual information, verifiable information, short of what has been put out from Brenton Tarrant himself. We do know that the attack in Sri Lanka wasn't carried out in retaliation to events in Christchurch, but because of its significant targeting in terms of attacking a church, whereas Tarrant attacked a mosque, both with significant dates, at the same time the Notre Dame Plus events, it would seem that someone is carrying out a coordinated psyops event which is designed to make us divide and conquer. We do know that there has been an increase of presence of right-wing and dissidents in Paris, as I forecast, which appears to be dividing and conquering the Yellow Vest movement, which the establishment is very, very keen to be seen as being right-wing, when in actual fact, the predominant groups which they're adding as tag-ons are not right-wing, they're anti-corporate, and that is the double speech. The old white dudes are saying, look out for the conspiracy run by white right-wingers, when in actual fact, the people running the show are white old dudes. That is my summary to date of where we actually are at.
And Ben Vidgen, postmanproductions.wordpress.com is the website, ladies and gentlemen, and make sure that you go into
Ben Vidgen's Facebook page and Postman Investigates are also my social media pages.
Yep, that's right. And make sure you do go into the description of this video, ladies and gentlemen, because Ben's bank account number is in there. I mean, those of you who have been sending me donations and things like that through this, we're splitting that. So I'm just going to send Ben some cash tomorrow morning. So yeah, we'll get that. But if there's any other donations and things like that, ladies and gentlemen, you feel like signing up to be a Patreon, or you want to start donating weekly through the PayPal or Kiwibank, all the links and all of the numbers and everything that you need are in the description. And the reason why I ask for your support, ladies and gentlemen, is because it means that I don't have to go out and chase advertisers and then interrupt
like I do.
interrupt my guests and things like that. Because I'm just going to level with you here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a lazy fucking cunt. Okay, like, but I don't want to have to go out and work. Okay, so if you send me money, I don't have to go out and work. It's great. I mean, it's not like I don't get any work done, but it's just like I'm hardly working. So anyway, my very special guest has been Ben Vidgen from postmanproductions.wordpress.com. Links and whatnot in the description, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to support our work. And again, thank you very much for all of you listening at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. And Danny will kill me if I don't mention this. AmericanFreedomRadio.com needs your donations as well, ladies and gentlemen. So just go to that homepage, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, and click on the donate banner right there, and give them a little bit of love too for carrying the stream. And also, of course, they have allowed me to control the stream for the last couple of days. You'll notice that we've been doing some Vinny Eastwood show marathons, and a lot of you have been in there for those shows and the marathons, and some of you aren't in the chat room today because there's just too much Vinny. It's just too much Vinny. All right, so anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Ben Vidgen, and we will see you all again sometime, folks.
Thank you very much for having me, Vinny.
Cheers, brother.